Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Bets and Banter, and today on the show, we're talking about none other than UFC 308. It's going down in Abu Dhabi at the Etihad Arena, and I'm very excited to break this one down. I did a first look earlier this week. I went in depth on some of these fights, including the main and the co-main event. However, we've done a lot more research. We've done a lot more tape study, a lot more due diligence in the interim, and we've also got a great guest, and maybe even two great guests. We'll see how the night plays out to share some thoughts with you. So without further ado, guys, let's bring in those sharp guests, starting with our friend Timothy Troiano. If you haven't familiarized yourself with the Lambo Plays podcast, that's your own damn fault, but do it right now. Make sure that you go subscribe over there. I was a guest on the show tonight with the co-host Timothy Troiano, as well as Narco Cop. Great content weekly, and it was an honor to be a part of it. How are you, my brother?
Good to be back with you, man. Short time. We get a refill, and we're going to be back at it right here for the people.
Absolutely. And we have another sharp guest loaded up in the back, the purveyor of the JB special, Live to Thrive. How are you, my brother?
Let's go, bro. UFC 308. Max versus Topuria. We got Khamzat versus Chimaev. I mean, not Khamzat versus Chimaev. It's late, bro. We got Khamzat versus Bobby Knuckles, and that's going to be a banger, too. So I'm excited for this one, low-key, bro. And my favorite is the early cards because, like, maybe I'm just, like, a gambling addict or something, and I feel like I don't have to wait so long. I'm just like, it's there already. I'm just excited for the card, bro.
Hell yeah, man. A deadline makes your, mind solidify a little bit, right? And so when we have that earlier deadline, I think people have to start, coming to conclusions a little bit. And for me, that was the case, right? I had to do my whole article. Normally, I do my main card preview. I hop on the air with you guys, and then after I get off the air, I write up the rest of the fights. No can do this week, right? We had to front load all the content. So all my write-ups are already done today, and that means we've got thoughts on all these fights. However, my guy Tim is on the back end of a second show, right? We just went live for a while. My man has been doing the damn thing. So we're not going to take all of Tim's time. What we're going to try and do is we're going to go a little bit rapid fire from the bottom of the card on to the top, and we might skip a couple fights along the way. But what we will do is before I get off the air, we'll circle back to every fight that we missed. We just want to make sure that we're respectful of our guest time. So thank you to the sharpest chat in the game. You have assembled once again. We got plenty of familiar names and faces in the chat already, and we got great guests. So without further ado, guys, let's do what we always do. Let's talk about some damn fights, and we'll start with the first one of the night. This one, of course, is going to be going down in the the welterweight division. We've got plenty of middleweight fights, but this is going down in the welterweight division. Short notice debutant, Carlos Leal. This is a guy that maybe if you watch PFL, he's on your radar. If you haven't watched PFL, this guy's going to be a new name and a new face, but I do think he's UFC ready. I'll just be clear about that off the rip. I think this guy is for real. I think whether he wins this fight or loses this fight, I think he can win UFC level fights, period. And so for me, I do think he is a live underdog in this spot. Rinat Fakhretdinov for me is not a picture of consistency. I faded this guy his last two fights. He skirted away with a split decision and a draw against two older guys, two savvy UFC vets, no doubt, but two guys that I do think are, getting up there in age, maybe a little bit post-prime. I think this guy, Carlos Leal, hits like a truck. I think if he can avoid getting submitted on the ground, if he can work his way back up to the feet, I do think he can tire out Rinat Fakhretdinov. This guy was on the verge of being TKO 3'd in both of his last two fights. So the win over Brian Battle is like the best that it looks, right? He looked like a minus 1,000. He beat a guy that I really respect, a guy who's very talented. But ultimately, if they ran that fight back, I think Brian Battle kills him. I think that was a performance where Rinat has the skills to wrestle, grapple, do that. But when you look at these late rounds, especially recently, he just doesn't seem like he has the cardio to go anymore. And I do think some people have drawn the comparison to Albert Duraev. I think that's fair. You see Albert Duraev on the Russian regional scene. He's dummying these guys. He's owning them in the wrestling and the grappling. He looked roided out to the gills. Then he gets to the UFC and everything was a lot harder to come by, right? Every takedown was harder to come by. The submissions, harder to come by. The finishes, harder to come by. And when he got hit on the feet, he didn't like it. So for me, I think that Rinat is the same way. I think he likes to bully. He likes to dictate. When he's having his way, he looks like $1 million. You resist. You give him some resistance. Like a guy like Carlos Leal looks like he's roided to the tits, looks like he's really anxious to be here. I think this guy's going to offer resistance. I think it's a dogger pass situation. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I agree on the money line that it's dogger pass for sure. I tend to like the Al by decision prop here is like plus 450, maybe even a split decision on him at 12-1. I think that he's the better striker by a decent amount, more power. Definitely gonna win moments. Just a better technical striker, better defense. Renat is chin up, there to be hit. Like you said, like he's had a pretty big swing down from. I was really impressed with his performance against Battle, and then just been less and less impressed. I think also in the Battle fight compared to the other two fights, like he just got zero resistance when he got on top against Battle. So I just don't think that that's why he probably didn't gas in that fight. Whereas versus Zaleski dos Santos and Dalby, they were resisting and getting up and making him work a hell of a lot more. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that I think Leal's the side. I think it also might be a good live spot because you might see Renat have a little bit more success early in the fight, getting the takedowns, and then struggling a little bit later on as the fight goes on.
Yeah, and one thing to note, the decision prop has come in pretty considerably on a few books, down to about 4-1 across most of the market. FanDuel an outlier at plus 490, Rivers 480. But you look at DraftKings as well as MGM, they've moved all the way down to plus 400 from 450 at DraftKings, and MGM same move, 450 to 400. So I think that it's interesting. There's been money coming in on that side. Meanwhile, the KO prop has gone up a little bit. And I do think that he's more likely to get jobbed out on the cards, whereas he could definitely hurt this guy and finish him, in my opinion. But maybe the referee will give a long leash for our guy, Renat Fakhretdinov, as well, something we got to be cognizant of. JB, how do you feel about this one, my man? Are we out to lunch, or do you like the Lion?
No, I don't mind the decision. Look, I actually think round 3 / decision might be a better look, just because I don't trust don't trust the cardio of Renat the later the fight goes. And I feel like the Easy Dose one was kind of a perfect storm. And I'm just so upset that we couldn't cash that one. But I saw the Andreas Michailidis fight, bro. And I said, I don't know about this dude, bro. I don't know. Like, he dominated that fight. But Andreas Michailidis isn't a good fighter. And there were moments in that fight where I was like, this guy could possibly be a future fade. He looked dominant. And then I think his very next fight was Brian Battle. And he just absolutely smoked him. Battle apparently had like a sickness during that fight, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure that's been talked about this week, but yeah, he was super sick. And I don't know, if they rematch, I'll probably take Battle to finish him, honestly. Like, I don't know if that fight actually plays out the same. So Kevin Lee, bro, that guy's not in the UFC anymore, far gone. I can't believe I picked Kevin Lee to beat this guy, Renat Fakhretdinov. That's probably literally one of the worst bets I've ever taken. But I just thought, like, this is like a guy with real wrestling resistance, good cardio, has the experience. I seen Renat, like, I just felt like this guy wasn't the real deal, and he just knocks him out. Another huge performance. And now he's going up against a guy in Easy Dose, where I just feel like Easy Dose had everything to possibly beat him. He had good cardio, amazing takedown defense, up against the cage and in the open mat. And I just don't know what Leal's going to look like off his back. I think he can defend the takedown well. From what I see, it looks good. But I also just don't have a huge sample size against like a lot of wrestlers. It's the style of Renat. But the thing with Renat is he doesn't control really well when he does get to the ground. And I think that's a problem in MMA, because the thing that takes the most energy, and maybe why he guesses, is because wrestling's fucking just hard to do. And I talk about this time and time again. Just go like to your living room right now and take 10 takedown attempts. You're going to be like, holy shit, I'm gassed. And that's without a like resisting body. So when you take these guys down and they just pop back up, it's super demoralizing, and it could be just taxing. And I think Leal's the better striker. So, yeah, that's what I got on this one, bro.
Yeah, I think there could be some value on the KO, some value on the decision, some value on the round 3 decision in terms of prop angles. And ultimately, I just think Leal is going to go out there and fight hard for your money. I don't think he's a punk. I don't think he's a bad fighter. I think he's a tough guy and a willing guy and a guy who stepped up on short notice and looked like $1 million making the weight. So for me, I think there's a lot to like about this guy, but it is potential a little bit versus credentials. We're not doing it at the UFC level. So obviously we give credence to Renat. That win over Kevin Lee knocked him out and submitted him in the first round. I mean, can't really ask for much more than that, but you just see that he doesn't have as many, quality wins that are lasting, except for the Brian Battle one. And you gave the context for maybe there was a little bit of reason why that one didn't go the right way. And I was on Renat. I think when he fought Michailidis back in the day at like minus 250 or something, like, I was like, okay, fair enough. Like, what is Michailidis really going to do to him? But I just think Leal is a dangerous guy against most people, right? And he did go out there and beat quality opponents, David Zawada, Ray Cooper. I think guys that could fight in the UFC. So for me, Renat probably a deserved favorite, but I think the line is too wide here. And also just keep in mind, the public perception is that Renat should smoke him in this fight, right? If you look, 6% of Tapology voters are picking Leal compared to 94% on the Fakhretdinov side. And, you don't want to make heads or tails of that too much, right? You don't want to overthink it, but you look at the odds and they don't reflect that, right? The odds reflect a much closer picture. And I think that's because sharp money came in on the Leal side. I think Renat is the much more well-known commodity here, but for me, upside with the underdog. We're going to skip ahead to another fight on the card, which is Farid Basharat and Victor Hugo. This is a weird fight, catch weight fight at 145 pounds. I think my guy Victor Hugo just said fuck 135 and showed up, in his own weight class. And, Basharat said, okay, I'll do it anyway. You look at these guys, the Basharat brothers, they kind of have these contentious face-offs. They're willing to go at it and go to bat with these people, and they feel confident in their cardio, their ability to push down the stretch. And I do think they're very talented in that regard. I think that this is the better Basharat brother. I pointed out the line was way too wide when Javid fought my guy Ayman Zahabi. Everybody, is making jokes in the comment section until Ayman Zahabi gets that hand raised. And I think when you look back at that fight, Javid is the one who wants to go out there and be stylish and throw the, fancy long strikes on the feet and look like Conor McGregor, but a knockoff version. I think when you look instead at a guy like Farid, he knows where his bread is buttered. He's trying to get the fight to the ground. He's got good grappling. He's got good technique from on top. The thing about it is Victor Hugo's the ultimate opportunist. Number one, he cheated his ass off for this fight. Number two, the guy is a dangerous finisher on the feet. He has knocked out welterweights cold, and he can also submit people, as we saw in his fights on the regional scene as well as in the Contender Series. That guy was having some wrestling success, and he dove, went for a knee bar, got it, and he sold out for it. He went slowly to the grip, then positioned it, and honestly, it looked pretty devastating in terms of the outcome. So I do think Victor Hugo is an opportunist. He's a dangerous guy, but I think we got to look at a fight where I do expect Farid better gas tank. But how successful is the wrestling now that this guy missed weight by, 8 pounds? I think he should still win. I think cardio is king in mixed martial arts. And I don't think Victor Hugo, as much as I love the guy, comes in with the best cardio conditioning in the weight class. But I do think that he's a guy that's going to go out there and try and kill him, for about 7.5 minutes here. I do think that he is a dangerous fighter in all phases. So I wouldn't be anxious to go lay minus 700 with almost anybody against Victor Hugo, but I do rate Basharat as a higher level. I just think Victor Hugo is more of an unknown. He's been finished several times. That's the downside to him coming in, but he also fought at suboptimal weight classes throughout his career. He's been a wild man. He's not afraid to fight anybody. And that's why he gets match made this way as well. He's willing to take on this fight that a lot of people don't want to take, but now he's doing things to position himself to possibly win it. Tim, how do you feel about this fight?
Yeah, I agree that Hugo is as big a cheater as you can get, man. 10 pounds. I mean, the dude's not even trying to make weight. Like, he's like, all right, you want to take it? I'm going to go 10 pounds heavier. I think that I like the Farid side in this one a decent amount. I think that there are props on the Hugo side that I think are pretty wild. His submission prop we were talking about on the Lambo plays, like his submission prop is 35-1, which is just craziness. Like, he's very, very, very opportunistic with his subs. Farid has put himself in some bad spots in fights before. I don't think that it happens, but I think you can't go wrong on 35-1 on a sub prop for a guy like Hugo, especially early in the fight. But that being said, I think that Farid's just very, very risk averse in striking realm. He's not going to give him the shots to be able to kind of bonk him. I think that he's going to probably get in on some takedowns pretty quick and chain him together and start to tire him out and break him over time and kind of cook him over time. And I like the round 2 and round 3 props for Farid, and I like the sub props for Farid just because I think that the type of opportunistic jiu-jitsu that Hugo goes with and goes for is going to allow Farid to just pass in advanced positions and be able to get his jiu-jitsu on. And I think once these guys get tired, anybody can be subbed. So yeah, I like late round props for Basharat, and I like the sub props. And if you like Hugo, I think that it's a must bet at 35-1 for him by sub.
And the ITD is like 12-1. I mean, the guy is a pretty proven finisher. You know what I'm saying? Like 17 wins inside the distance in his career. How about this, guys? The guy's last loss was via injury, right? Like I believe he popped a rib or something. He was 21 years of age. He's on a 14-fight win streak. How often do you see guys that are like that in terms of credentials as this big of an underdog in a UFC fight. I would just point that out to people as a, point of caution when you're looking to, just load up these parlays with big chalked out favorites. Like, yeah, do I think he's the right favorite? I said that initially, of course, especially the guy who shows up prepared, but cheating in MMA is like encouraged, right? Like nobody does anything to stop you. And in this case, right, who is the onus put on? The guy who made weight like a professional to go accept the fight with the guy who missed weight, not like a professional, right? That's always how the onus is. Who got screwed after Michelle Pereira and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson didn't fight? Wonderboy, because he was the one that said no. And Michelle Pereira got to rattle off 3 more easy wins and get a main event opportunity. That's the difference, okay? So I do think that when you look at a fight like this, it's rare to see a guy like Victor Hugo in this spot as a massive underdog. I'll just say that. JB, how do you feel about this, my man?
I feel like this is a really good fight. It'd be an interesting parlay buster as well. I said that last week about Robelis, and I was semi-serious, but you can't trust these big favorites in MMA. The sport is just way too volatile to be thinking, like, I'm just going to throw Fareed in a parlay. It's an easy A-side matchup for him. Nah, Hugo's dangerous on the other side. Just think you got to go back to the ABCs, right? Always bet cardio. And one guy's going to be doing jiu-jitsu, right? And one guy's going to be wrestling and doing jiu-jitsu from the top position. So who's going to be wasting more energy? The guy on bottom going for all these scrambles, going for all these submissions. Now, if you told me he was going to use these submissions to get back to his feet and make this a striking matchup, man, all day. But I don't know if he's able to attack with arm bars, with, I've seen the guy even throw up rubber guard, go plata. Like, let's just go for it. Definitely has like a jiu-jitsu credentials, but I just don't think he understands the wrestling positions and MMA grappling positions, even up against the fence with Falcao. I feel like if Falcao was any better of a cage wrestler, he probably gets Hugo down. I didn't feel like the base was all there for Hugo personally, just from what I was watching.
I think Falcao's like a 5th degree, or like a 3rd or 5th degree black belt, just for whatever it's worth. He's a very credentialed grappler.
Heck yeah. I definitely think he's good once he gets to the mat. I just feel like he doesn't have the same type of wrestling as a guy like Farid, or even a type of control that Farid has, just the way he flows from position to position. I was there for the finish prop on Clayton Rodriguez, and I'm going to make a call on this one. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm just going to call it outright. But the way I played this fight was kind of similar to what Tim said. I played the 2-3, and then I took a tiny sprinkle at 38-1 or 39-1 on the round 3 KO prop, TKO, just because we said it time and time again, like, I'm pretty sure it's got to be plus EV at this point this year, because you just need like the Moicano, the Dawson, the Jillian Robertson, and that's got to cover all the ones you went for at this point. And even Moicano versus BSD, I don't know how you get to that one, but
just one of them covers it. Actually, they're like 40-1.
I know, it's crazy, dude, and people just don't look at them. And I get it, because Javid, when has he even gotten a KO? It's like a head kick KO. But I think the real key here is the cardio, 1. 2, I think he's fucking pissed off that this guy didn't make weight, and he wants to show him, like, hey, I'm gonna fucking beat your ass. I'm not gonna take the neck. I'm just gonna pummel you into fucking oblivion. And he's at ATT now, and we've seen literally who are the guys that are getting these finishes? Where are they training out of? And he's been there for quite a while now, so that could be a potential change. And you hear the noise when you're an MMA fighter as well. Like, you don't want to let it get to you, but this guy is boring. He's really good, but he's boring. He's really good, but he's boring. How do you finish? Like, how do you get a finish? A sub ain't going to do it, right? A ground and pound knockout is going to get you to where you want to be. And he's minus 800. He should be able to win any way he wants. It opened 12-1 earlier on Bet Online. I looked at that line and I was like, that's going to get hit at some point or another. And it came down quite a considerable amount. So don't think it's in round 1. It could be. He was piecing Lapalus up with some leg kicks. I thought he did good in the striking versus a guy who's actually really good in Lapalus. Maybe not as dangerous as Hugo. I think round 1's really sketchy, but as it goes on, I think, dude, he's just going to grapple this guy. And once he's on top, if he's able to finish him via sub, then I think he's able to finish him however he wants. And Hugo's also, like, we talked about this, Hugo isn't the type of guy that's going to, kind of try to survive, right? He's a little bit be killed. So, kind of like Rafa Garcia, this guy isn't just going to play off his back like Joe Selecki. He's going to try to get up, and Danaher says it best. When you go for a submission, you give up position, that's when you're most susceptible to a submission. So it could be the rear naked choke, but you're also giving up position. This guy just takes a body triangle, comes up on top, elbows, and this guy's just dead gassed. I don't see why it can't happen that way. So I like the 2-3, and I took a little tiny sprinkle on the 3 KO because I don't think it comes in round 2. I think Hugo's pretty fucking tough. Probably comes late.
Fair enough. I'll just close out this fight by saying, like, the more I look into this fight and think about it, like, I just can't get to the Farid price. I'm a huge Farid guy. You guys can go back and look at my work. I said that they were punishing Clayton Rodriguez and giving him that fight up a weight class to tell him to go fuck himself for missing weight against Tyra. I said that before the fight. Everybody was like, are you sure? Clayton's pretty good prospect. And then he got embarrassed, right? Because he had no ground game. He had no business in there with him. But I think that when you look at this fight, like, I respected Victor Hugo coming into Contender Series, and a lot of people thought he was goofy and gimmicky and the tape wasn't all there. And I just think that now I'm looking at a guy who goes from being favored, and 87% of Tapology voters picked him to beat Pedro Falcao, who's a good grappler. And now he's out there against a guy who I rate as a good grappler and a guy that can compete with him on the feet as well. But, like, the fight is 6-1 to end by knockout. And, like, number one, I think you guys are right that there's a TKO, there's a pace-based finish for Farid Basharat on the table here. ABC's always bet on cardio. But on the other side of things, like, are we going to pretend Victor Hugo has no chance to knock this guy the hell out? Because I could just tell you, Victor Hugo hits like a truck. That was the thing I liked about him coming into Contender Series. Is it the most technical striking you've ever seen? No. But when he hits people, they don't effing move. And that's at 170 as well. So this guy's fought at all these different weight classes. He didn't make the weight. He didn't cut the weight. My man is feeling probably just fine today. And if he knocks this guy silly, he's going to come back in the YouTube comment section and dunk on a lot of people like he did after the Contender Series last time. All right. Because a lot of people were saying how Cott was going to use his pace and his cardio and whatever. I don't think people expected him to wrestle. I think they thought he was going to strike with him. But then he started striking a little bit. And everybody that starts striking with this guy starts wrestling with him. So I think that that's not an accident, right? I think he hits hard and people are like, fuck this. Like, let me just get this to a place where I can get a hold of him. He'll give up bad positions. He's almost too lackadaisical, but he is just opportunistic. So for me, he kind of does fit the mold of a potential parlay buster. It does remind me of when his brother was in a similar spot where everybody is picking him to win against a guy who I think is a solid vet that just doesn't get any credit. And so absolutely, Victor Hugo is not Ayman Zahabi. He's not training with Faraz every day. He's not the same level of consistency. He doesn't show up with the same cardio. I think all that's different in terms of drawing the comparison. That's where it stops. But I do think like fade Victor Hugo long-term at your own peril. The guy hits like a truck and he's opportunistic with the subs. And I don't think he's a complete punk. If he fights at 145, I think he'd be a lot like a Joe Anderson Brito archetype, right? Where he can go out there and kill people early, but if he doesn't, then it's going to start to get dicier the longer the fight goes on. So we could leave it there. Next up, guys, we will talk about Abus Magomedov and Bruno Ferreira. We're playing a little bit of skip to my Lou, but I hope you guys enjoyed the show nonetheless. We'll skip back to those fights at the other side. Tim, why don't you start us off with your thoughts on this matchup, my brother?
Yeah, I think fight where you get a guy like Bruno Ferreira that's extremely dangerous in the first, say, 7 minutes or so of the fight, definitely in round one. Just a moment type fighter. He's really not proactively grappling in fights, really not throwing a lot of volume, just kind of picks his shots and then throws huge bombs. I feel like he's gotten kind of, I mean, obviously he knocked out RoboCop, but I feel like he's gotten a bunch of guys that are also kind of match up well with him. You get the chin of Phil Hawes, who I think any one of us on the panel could probably knock out at this stage in the game. It's been knocked out in pillow fight competitions with his daughter. So yeah, I think, and then you get Stoltzfus, who always seems to be winning a fight until he's losing a fight. And then RoboCop is a great fighter, but if there is a knock on him, it's that he can be put out. Abus, I think, has had extremely higher level of competition at this point. He's got some cardio issues as well, but I just think he's going to be so much bigger in this fight, and he's going to have a huge size advantage, both height and reach. I think he's an all-around better MMA fighter. He's got more paths to win in this fight. He could grapple if he wants to. He could stay at range. He also throws some heat as well. So I feel like he could win the fight any which way. I am leaning towards a decision or a late finish from him, but I'm leaning towards a decision. It's a pretty good line. It's plus 550. for Abus by decision. I think that if Ferreira can take a shot, it's either Ferreira can take a shot. I think he's round one in this, just major moments in round one. I don't think that it's a decision. I don't think he's got very much decision equity. And I think Abus has the ability to, if he does get tired in rounds 2 or 3, he could wrestle. So I just feel like more paths and just a better all around MMA fighter, fought way better competition. So give me a boost to win a decision plus 550. Don't hate round 3 either, but he kind of tires out. So I much more rather have the plus 550 by decision.
Interesting. Okay. I like where your head's at. Interesting thoughts. JB, how do you feel about this one, my man? Do you like the same side? Do you feel differently? What do you think?
I have a few thoughts about the fight. I think it's a little bit of a volatile fight, to be quite honest with you. I don't know if I'm going to be throwing any money on this one, but I think Bruno's super dangerous early on. I think Abus is super dangerous early on as well. So this could be just whoever hits the other person first, bonks him, gets him out of there. Both these guys, knocked out Dustin Solsvis. Bruno Ferreira, I guess, was a little bit greasier, right? Because it wasn't a few seconds of a fight. He hits him with the spinning back elbow after some adversity. Abus just front kicks him to the face, and you gotta, be aware of that, because especially when you're trying to cover the range, throw these big wing bombs, you're leaving your chin open. And I think, it's been mentioned this week a few times, the linear attacks from Abus, but what I really haven't heard is, where's the grappling going to go in this fight? What's this fight? A lot of people thinking this might go the distance. I don't know, man. With these two guys, with the gas tank issues, this might be slot fest just galore. And I don't necessarily think all the equities in the KO. I think Abus himself has a lot of chokes on the record. If you go back and look, I mean, I know it's not versus the best level of competition, but he's got a lot of guillotine chokes, super long arms. And we talk about, when these guys have long arms, they're able to get the front chokes a lot better, right? Took the back of Strickland. Sean Strickland's not just fucking mark in the grappling. Guy's I believe a black belt himself, and this guy was able to go ahead and just backpack him smooth. So who's to say, if he does backpack Bruno Ferreira, who we've seen have cardio issues, that he just doesn't completely gas out. And even on the other end, it's not like this dude Abus isn't liable to get bonked and shoot himself into a bad situation. Bruno Ferreira, judo black belt. I don't know if he also has a BJJ black belt, but I know he's not a complete moron down there. I've seen submission skills from the guy on film on his Instagram. It's not like he's a complete fish. And I believe Abus has been subbed himself before. So cardio questions on both sides. I think both guys know how to grapple. I think a lot of people are expecting a knockout here. And I think, you take a look at some of the prices on this fight. And if there's just volatility in general, I don't think it's necessarily a KO every single time. I think Abus is could be chinned. He got chinned by Luis Taylor. He's been hurt before. Even some of the last fights, I feel like he slowed down a lot versus Alves. And that was a fight, where he looked a lot better, but there was really, what was the resistance? He's able to get the takedowns whenever he wanted. I don't know if Bruno's just going to fall out like that. And, it's a short price on a guy I feel like a lot of people are on in Abus. So I'll probably go dog or pass here, but I think there's methods on the prop market that might be worth a look.
Yeah, and I'll round out the thoughts on this one. I think you hit on something I also hit on, which is maybe Bruno Ferreira's grappling being a little slept on. I do think Abus Magomedov, good takedown defense, good, first layer, especially kind of knows what he wants in terms of defense. I think the cardio is a problem. I think he could also get hurt on the feet, and that could lead to some grappling success for Bruno. The other thing is Bruno's very unconventional. You mentioned judo. He's actually a double black belt, but judo was his first love, and he's been doing it for 23 years. So you see that in his double, baseball bat grip on the wrist, throwing people over his shoulder and shit like that. He's a very weird grappler in some of those exchanges. I do think he's a pretty dynamic scrambler as well. But that being said, he's way undersized here. People did note that in the chat. I think that's a sharp note. He can get front kicked in the face. I think that's a big liability here. Honestly, you just look at the guy's style. And I thought that we saw Ruziboyev show some tact and some strategy on the feet, right? He got him to throw a low kick, caught it and killed him. But when you look at this guy's striking, I think it's a lot of power and a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of aggression, but it's not super sophisticated. So I do think there's a chance he runs himself onto something big early. I did give out the KO1 as a Lambo play earlier on the Lambo Play show, but when I look at the fight overall, I think there's just a ton of different ways this one could play out, right? Like, I think it could go to decision. I think it could be a submission either way. I think either one of these guys could gas out worse than the other. But overall, the one thing that makes me lean towards Abu Magomedov here is he's just had so many more experiences, right? He's been in a 5-round main event scheduled for the UFC. He's gone out there. He's had these bigger fights and opportunities. And I think that kind of reflects in he's had 30 pro fights. He's been around major organizations a long time. Bruno Ferreira, higher ceiling long-term, as far as I'm concerned. But right now, today, he's still a very young, inexperienced guy. And I think he's in the wrong weight class. I think if he goes down a weight class, killer. I think right now he's just going to be undersized in a lot of these big matchups. And that other guys in this division can grapple, can wrestle. It's probably going to be him, having to go 50-50 with some of these guys on the feet. But the one thing I'll just say is, not many people have a win over Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez. He's 7-2 in the promotion. Only one guy's finished him in the UFC. And it was this guy on short notice. And he used a lot of good head movement and killed him, right? It was just got him out of position, threw back and murked him. And I think when you look at that fight, like RoboCop was bigger, RoboCop's better on paper, and he got killed. So I think you got to be very cognizant of like, this is a middleweight fight. Neither one of these guys has a perfect chin, and they're probably going to engage in what could only be described as an insane fight. There's a chance it's grappling, but there's a chance it's just a wild slugfest like the last one with this Bruno Ferreira guy. And that's a fight that could go 50-50. But it's not a fight where I feel super comfortable laying chalk on either fighter, frankly. Next up, guys, we've got Orolbai and Rebecki. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Tim?
I think the line is just a little wide, kind of an overcorrection from the previous just gas job by Rebecki versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. I think, honestly, like what I gave away on the Lambo pod, I said it was just a wide line, playing the line kind of thing. What I really think happens is it's probably like a round 3 finish or a decision for Orolbai, but I thought that the line on Rebecki by like decision or split is kind of wide, but I just think it's a little bit closer fight than people are giving it credit for, and how people are talking about just Rebecki is just kind of discounting him after his last performance. I just think that's obviously he's gassed in other fights. He's gassed against Nick Fiore as well, and I just think he's 3-0 in decisions for Rebecki, and I think that Orolbai had some bad moments in his last fight versus Brenner. I know that he was supposedly sick, but I feel like the fight's just a little bit of a market overcorrection on this one. But I do think that the favorite should be Orolbai, and I think that there's a possibility that he could finish him later or just win a pretty easy decision. But I think the line's again a little bit wide.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, man. On pay-per-view fight weeks, favorites get steamed up. Like, I think the right guy's favored here. When you look at Orolbai, he pushes a good pace. He's dangerous with his hands. He's got a lot of power. I think he's a durable guy. I don't think he's afraid to, push a high pace in the wrestling and grappling and wear somebody else down, get both people tired, and then see who wants it better. I think he's pretty good in those kind of scenarios as well. However, he does have one loss on the record, got outpaced a little bit in a decision that was earlier on in his career. And you look at a guy like Mateusz Rebecki, lot of experience on the regional scene, right? Was favored heavily to beat a guy who's, 10-5 in the UFC. I think he was 9-5 at the time, but a guy who had fought top guys and Carlos Diego Ferreira and been very competitive in a lot of those fights. And I think that when you look at, how his run out has been, Rebecki had a lot of success in the early going. Then he got his eyes swollen shut and he got beat within an inch of his life, right? It was not a good look at the end. He did get tired as well. But it's easy to get tired when you can't see and you're getting your ass beat, right? Like, damage is tiring. And I think that that's part of what happened there. But I also think he's a muscle-bound guy. He's a little bit undersized as well. So I think that when you look at Orolbai, he's got more room to run in this fight. Like, later on in the fight, I think he'll probably be doing better. But in the early going, I think that you're looking at a guy in Rebecki who starts very hot with the calf kicks, who starts very hot with the punches. And I do think Orolbai is a little bit there to be hit when he's not grappling. He's very powerful. He's willing to exchange, but he's also there to be hit in the exchanges. So I think that there's, marginal room for concern in that regard. But ultimately, I think Rebecki's biggest edge, or like skill set against a lot of opponents is his grappling. And I just don't know that he has a big enough grappling edge here to try and leverage that. Like, I think the physicality is going to be too much from Orolbai for him to pull off a sub. So that's probably, the way he's going to look to get this done is either, crack him early, kill him with the calf kick, or put him in a submission. But I just think the longer fight does favor Orolbai here as the guy who's willing to go downhill on you, push a harder pace, and break people late in the fight, round 2 and round 3. I bet this guy up a weight class against Uros Medic. And I think that when that was the case, it was because Medic is not a good grappler. And I was like, he is going to dominate him there. And that's the one thing here where I'm like, he can probably take down Rebecki, but is he going to dominate him in the same way? I don't see that. I think he's going to have to work harder in this one. So for me, that's what keeps me off the price tag, but the hat is plus EV, right? We all know that hat is hard to fade. What do you think about this one, JB?
I think, dude, how are you going to get to Abu Dhabi in this short of time, bro? Don't you got a fight to make, bro? Like, come on, man. We need my guy.
I like to think I have more hair than Mateusz Rebecki, but
dude.
In every other regard, he's got I love his facial hair.
Somehow I'm Tanner Bozer, so I don't know what's going on nowadays, bro. I think this guy's dangerous early. Honestly, there's a few fights on this card, bro, where I know we've been calling it constantly, but I could see the draw on this card. Like, there's a few ones, like Renat wins 2 rounds wrestling, gets 10-8 in round 3. Is that impossible? No, it's happened before. Orolbai, been to a draw before. Rebecki's super dangerous early on, and this guy's tough. Like, I could see Rebecki Orolbai's hittable, and if the wrestling's not going, like you said, if the wrestling's not going for him, I think Rebecki cracks. Maybe not the most technical striking, but he's got power. I think both guys are, there to be hit. I think this could be a striking match. I think the grappling probably cancels it out. I think Rebecki will be able to defend. If he gets on his back, I think he'll be able to get up. Same vice versa for Orolbai. I don't think Rebecki's just going to catch a flash sub like he has in the past. Maybe he gets on top once or twice early, but I don't think, Orolbai's some slouch in the grappling. I think this is more a volatile striking matchup between two guys who, man, I honestly think this could go either way. So, yeah, it's a dog or pass for me. Rebecki, he definitely gassed in the last fight. I'm not going to say that he didn't, but let's just take it into context. He was beating the absolute piss out of Carlos Diego Ferreira, trying to get a finish. The damage starts to income, and then it starts to look really bad for him. But let's not act like Orolbai in his last fight didn't slow down either as well versus Brenner. I know Brenner's like a cardio machine, but it was a high-paced fight. Could be a high-paced fight here versus Rebecki, and I don't know if, it's necessarily a late finish either. So I think Orolbai probably is the rightful favorite, but line's wide, and this one could just go to decision, be type split decision, like Tim said. So I haven't bet on it yet, but man, I don't know if I'm gonna get to Rebecki. It's kind of like I want to see the ball go through the hoop one more time after the miss before I feel comfortable putting money on him again.
Yeah, I think it's a dog or pass that is likely a pass. I think there's reason enough to see why Orolbai is favored here. But from a money line standpoint, I find it hard to imagine there's a big edge on the Orolbai side, given he's been nothing but aces as a favorite. He's been underpriced throughout most of his UFC career. I mean, that was a joke line against Medic. He absolutely owned that guy. So I just think when you look back, that's the reason why the prices are now getting a little inflated. Is before they were behind the 8 ball. Now they're trying to play a little catch up. But I think that's why you got to get in when the going's good, and you need to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. That's the goal, boys. So I think that we've got plenty more good opportunities, and let's talk about one next. I know my guy JB is passionate about this fight, so we'll kick it over to him. Jeff Neal taking on RDA at 170 pounds. Say it ain't so, the birthday boy. What do you think about this one, JB?
I think this is a hell of a scrap, bro. I think this is a banger. I think people are sleeping on RDA, sleeping on him. Let's go back and look at the last 2 matchups, like Vicente Luque. And people will talk about the brain bleed and that he's not the same, but guy is a BJJ black belt, had a massive size advantage, and he took the grappling to RDA. Nobody was expecting that, but he took the grappling to RDA. And different style of fight than you're going to get from a Jeff Neal. And let's not act like Vicente Luque is some just complete slouch. I think he's definitely slowing down. We'll talk about that another time, but it's not act like he's a complete slouch. And then Mateusz Gamrot, one of the stickiest grapplers in the game. So 2 back-to-back, kind of tough matchups for him. And he had Gamrot hurt. Who doesn't get Gamrot hurt? But at multiple points. And Jeff Neal just kind of feels like sometimes his head is in the clouds. Sometimes his coach is yelling at him. Things are going on. He definitely fought close with Ian Gary. It was a great fight, but, he's gotten beat now 2 times in a row. And the thing I want to talk about that I don't know if many people have mentioned is this guy in the middle of camp got a DUI. I don't know, how, good of a sign that is for a guy coming from a camp that I don't really trust that much in 4 to 7. I know Ryan Spann got the win, but that's an early win. We talk about process. It's just, I don't know. Saif Saud, I think he's a really good coach. I've always respected him, but it seems like something's just missing from that camp. And then you got RDA, who, back in the day took his boxing to Freddie Roach, right? Trying to improve in these different areas. And we definitely saw improvement in the boxing. He's a BJJ black belt in his own right. I think he might be back on the, USADA program supplementation. And I think that's a huge factor in here. And I think he's going to be able to push up push up Jeff Neal against the cage when he wants. I think he can make this a lot greasier than people think. I think his striking isn't as bad as people think. I don't think he wants to get into a pure boxing match with Jeff Neal, but I think he could have some success in the striking, then mix in the grappling, force, Jeff Neal to work. I think Jeff Neal's, at certain points probably willing to stay up against the cage. He's been submitted in the past. Not saying that RDA is going to have success with takedowns, because I do think it's going to be really hard to take down Jeff Neal. He's got historically very good takedown defense. But catch a kick, a slip, anything happens, and this guy is able to get on top, he's going to have a massive advantage there, and he might be able to just steal around that way. I think that the price is way too off here. I understand it. Some people are saying that Jeff Neal is going to knock out RDA. Man, when was the last time RDA got knocked out? It was against Rafael Fiziev. Let's go back and look at that fight. What was Fiziev price there? It was like minus 225. And I had a ticket on him, and I was shitting myself, bro, because RDA was putting the sauce on this man until he got fucking kicked in round 5 and just absolutely put to sleep. But before that, you could have gave that fight to RDA. That's a 5-round win against a fucking elite level striker at 155. Now you don't have to cut all that weight. Now you have the cardio, at 170. And I think he has a stylistic matchup here that he could definitely win. Call me crazy, but I think RDA gets the job done via submission or decision. I think he's live for a sub more than people think he is here, because the level's advantage on the mat. I know the last guy he subbed was Brian Barberena, but it's not like Neal never been submitted before. I know it's a standing rear naked choke versus Shavkat, but he also got submitted previously. Go back, I know it's a while ago, but he got submitted by Martin Sano, Nate Diaz's boy, back in the day. So maybe he just hasn't been on these ground situations where a guy is that much, higher level than him, which I think RDA is, to take advantage of stuff like that. So everyone in the comments, go ahead, say it. Neal makes it look easy. We'll see. I think that's what everybody thinks, and I think you're absolutely wrong. Now, you have it up on the screen, and you made me remember. This guy, Renato Moicano, is the cream of the crop right now. I know he was in Brazil, eating steaks, drinking the beer. But RDA beat the piss out of him, pillar to post. It was from round 1 to round 5. Guy was able to get his way on him every single time. So, yeah, man, I like RDA here. I think the price is fucking ridiculous, and I'll go back to the well with him. I'm mad I didn't go with Hooker versus Gamrot. You think I'm not going to go with RDA, my man, back as a dog on his 40th fucking birthday? You guys are out of your mind. I'm going with him.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you look at my results, I've been a little too bullish on RDA, but I faded him with Fiziev. I thought that was a good spot. I had Fiziev ITD. That was a really sketchy spot, but I did think Fiziev was, had a chance to win there. I had too much exposure on that fight overall, if you look back. But when you look at the RDA Moicano fight, I feel like that was one of the best bets I've ever made, right? He beat the absolute shit out of that man. And personally speaking, that KO prop, I thought it should have cashed. I don't know if the referee was on the take. My man got hit with a head kick, fell over to the side. He was on all fours crawling around. RDA's like, what do you need me to do to this, man? And then he kind of just took his foot off the gas. But the problem for me making a clear read on this fight is you got a 40-year-old. I'll just tell you guys, Fightnomics says over the age of 38, your chances of getting knocked out go through the roof. Let's not pretend Jeff Neal can't kill anybody, right? If he just hits anybody, they could die. He's a big hitter. The thing I note and that I agree with you on, the lack of aggression. Like the guy just fundamentally used to be a more aggressive fighter than he is today. Used to have a lot of first round finishes, infrequent today. Maybe he got a little too technical for his own good. He's thinking about it too much. My man's just not throwing as often, watching fights pass him by, letting Ian Gary, do the 2-step around him for 15 minutes. And I think that Jeff Neal is a talented guy. He's the younger guy by 6 years. There's some things that are working in his favor, so to speak. But I don't think of Jeff Neal as a guy right now that's built to cover these huge price tags. You look at his previous performances. He's got 2 wins in his last 6 fights. One of them was a knockout. One of them was a split decision. So I don't think that he's been out there blowing people out of the water. And most of the time he's losing these close competitive decisions. He's just letting them slip through his fingers. So I think RDA has a chance to beat him via decision. But I also think you pointed it out. RDA via submission, I do think there's a level gap on the ground. Whether he can get it there is the ultimate question. I think there's a good chance he doesn't get it to the ground at all, and he needs to do the Neil Magny and push him into the fence and hump him and try and hope that he doesn't get drilled with an uppercut. But at 40 years of age, when you're in there with a guy like Jeff Neal, I don't think anybody would hold it against him, and I think he does have a chance to win the fight that way. And ultimately, I think RDA cutting to 155 was a problem for him. The catchweight fight with Moicano, he looked great. The fight with Vicente Luque, he landed some big strikes, but unfortunately he couldn't get the finish. He got out positioned, out hustled. I said that Vicente Luque had an underrated submission game prior to that fight. I was bullish on that, but I didn't think that he was going to be able to out wrestle him like that. So the wrestling is the number one thing that's held him back at 170 pounds. And I don't think Jeff Neal is going to wrestle. So I think that the chances of RDA overperforming are there, but that the risk factor is there. He's 40 years of age. He could get knocked out brutally here, and he could walk off into the sunset. So, my man, Tim, what do you think about this one?
Again, I think this is a good, it's a potential value loser, which I think there are a fair share of in this card. I do like the RDA by decision and RDA by split decision. I think it's going to be really tough for him to get down Jeff Neal. I think that at 170, he just seems too small to get these guys down. And he's been able to actually, like Luque got him down and was just kind of ragdolling him in this situation. I just think he's kind of too small for 170 to be able to get his grappling game on. At 155, I think he's elite at grappling these guys and getting them down to the ground and then fucking them up. But I do think that the cage push is going to be super, super live. I mean, I think he's as strong as Neil Magny in holding a guy to the cage. I think Neil Magny is good in the clinch as well. I think that's where Jeff Neal kind of makes a ton of mistakes and not trying to get off of those positions. Like you said as well, I just think that Jeff Neal's volume is never in a position where you're wanting to lay -3XX on him. In fights where he's not going to grapple at all and he's going to throw 60 to 70 strikes and have to have moments. Can he have moments in this fight? Of course. Is he a faster, better striker at this point? Yes, but that doesn't mean that RDA can't strike with him and can't grapple it, can't cage push him and stall him out in some rounds and then make the fight a hell of a lot closer. We were talking about in the Lambo plays, last Narco made the comment about how last week this fight reminded him of the Font versus Kyler Phillips. And it's spot on. It's just you get these huge dogs that are older, that have a ton of ability, and you're just people just dismiss their abilities. So I think I think RDA still has some game, has definitely abilities. He's not completely washed at this point. So yeah, I mean, I think it's 5-1 RDA points. His split is 12-1, ends by split is 4-1. I think those are all good.
Fair play, my man. I think one thing I want to note here is I'm not just a Jeff Neal hater or anything.
Yeah,
like
that's
that,
a perfect word.
If you look back, Jeff Neal, I faded him big against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He closed a favorite there and got absolutely dummied. And then if you look back by the way, dummied, it was a bad fight. He got his ass whooped in that fight. Then you look back at Santiago Ponzinibbio, mistaken bet by me, right? I laid it in a fight that went to a split decision, but also it was a really close fight and it could have went to Ponzinibbio. So that's a guy who's well past his sell by date in terms of his best stuff in the division. went to a really competitive decision with him. So now you're out there further on the risk curve at the big plus money, and you get to find out. Now, those guys are both 100% 170 pounders, right? RDA is a little bit more of that tweener. I think that's why it's interesting. VB says Neal ITD, not the worst play. RDA may not take the bombs that Shavkat took. I think that's fair play. I do think that Neal hits very hard. I think that's the danger factor here. But ultimately, if the fight goes the distance, I just think it's going to play out closer than the number. And I do think the one thing to note, guys, is the Neal Magny fight. Like, everybody's talking about, he can't move these guys around. And I hear you, but he moved Neal Magny around, no problem. And Jeff Neal didn't, right? Like, they both had that fight, and one guy easily moved the other guy and killed him, and the other guy struggled the whole time. And you could say it was about the life-threatening illnesses and all this stuff. I just don't think he's looked the same since. So, Lord willing, one day we get back to head kick knockout Jeff Neal, but hopefully it's not this weekend and it's a little bit further into the future. But our guy Tim has been up for a long time. He's been doing the damn thing with us. So I want to just kick it to our guy Tim and say, Tim, any other fights that you want to talk about before you get out of here, my brother? We'll kick it to you. We'll give you a chance to break them down. I know that the Ankalaev Rakic fight is one that you're maybe not as interested in, but if you have like quick hitter thoughts that you want to give on all the rest of the fights from now to the main card, please go ahead, my brother. The floor is yours. You're on mute, my man.
Rookie mistake. I've done it twice tonight. Yeah, I mean, I think that the co-main and the main are just like, we obviously got to break those down. I think that those are just the best fights. The main event is one of the best fights I've been super excited about. Do you want to break down the Ige and Murphy fight?
Sure thing. Like, I was giving you the floor for any thoughts that you wanted to go through, but we could go through like, we could just skip ahead to that fight if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, like the main ones that I liked. I mean, I think that the Chimaev fight, I like the Chimaev by sub. And I think he subs him in probably round 1 or round 2. I think that Whittaker is clearly the better striker, but there's some tendencies that he does when he gets taken down, that he gets on all fours, and he basically he's going to give up his back, in my opinion, to Chimaev. And whether or not Chimaev goes for ground and pound or for the sub, I think that the sub is going to be more live. But he obviously could KO him as well. But I like the sub in round 1. The sub alone at plus 270, sub 1 plus 750, sub 2 plus 1400. And I think it's also the main event. I already made a bet. It's gone now. The line is gone now, but I think 5-1 still isn't bad. That's on Bet Rivers. Max by decision. I have Max by decision at 7-1. Just hard to get. It's like an auto click. I just think that you get a guy that's out voluming everybody that he fights. Should be a really razor close fight. I also like ends by split at plus 550 in that fight for the main event. I think that that's a very, very good line. I was expecting like plus 400, plus 350 to plus 400 for that fight. It seems like every 5-round, not even every 5-round fight, every fight, there's like at least one judge that's on peyote or Special K or something, and just watching a completely different fight.
Unless it's an actually close fight, right, Tim? Like, they'll actually close fights end up going to unanimous, and every other fight is a fucking split decision.
Totally agree. Yeah, so I think that that's a really good look. Both ends by split, and I don't hate the max by split or the max decision. The other fights that I think Dan Ige could be a value loser as well. Similar to the last fight that we were talking about with RDA. I think he's super live for a decision, super live for a split. It's all similar. Like, I think that they're all those fights are like the Font fight last week, where it's just like these guys are huge dogs, but they have potential to win. And then I think that the last one I think that the Petrosian versus Shara fight, I think, is going to be split as well. But you got two strikers, and I think that Shara is probably going to get, even if he loses, I think he's going to get a robbery decision here where they're at. And I think they want him to win because he's the pirate, and he's going to be like, I am the captain now. He's going to pull out Captain Phillips and he's just going to do the whole thing. But yeah, I think Petrosian, I think there's a lot of money on him. I think the books probably don't want him winning at this point, but the UFC does want Shara winning. So I think ends by split plus 300 on that one. Shara by split plus 600. But it's been a blast here chopping it up with you guys. Appreciate it.
Hell yeah, my brother. We see that one the exact same. We want to thank the pride of Pennsylvania, Timothy Troiano, for coming on, the purveyor of the Lambo Plays podcast. Guys, make sure you go show some love. Narco Cop YouTube channel, Lambo Plays podcast each and every Friday night. Make sure you go show some love. Appreciate that support. Thank you so much for coming on, Tim. It's always a pleasure to chop it up with you, my man. Lord willing, we both have a great night. Typically, when we see the board the same, things work out. So hopefully it's another one of those. Knock on wood. We're rooting for the good guys. We know that you're one of them. Thank you, buddy.
Peace, guys. Thanks again.
Good luck,
Hell
bro.
yeah.
You too.
Be well, brother. And now, guys, what we have to do is we got to cover everything that we've missed so far, all right? We've been around the world. We've been around the horn. And what we're going to do is we're going to free flow it. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and hit us with those. I got to say thank you to Jimmy the Drunk with the $4.99 dono. Don't leave it to the judges. One of the oldest in the book and one of the truest, right? The judges will make you cry. That's what Burt Watson used to say. And that's the truth, guys. So go out there, try and finish these fights, try and bet on finishers, guys, that can actually put people away. Because if you leave it in the hands of the judges, they're going to make you cry. My brother, let's go ahead and we'll go top down, right? We'll mix it up a little bit. We'll keep people guessing. We'll keep them on their toes. Let's talk about the main event, my brother. What do you think about this main event? How do you feel? I'll tell you the truth, man. I can't get a great feel. I can't come to you guys like, this is the side. Like sometimes I'll tell you guys when I think I found the side on one of these fights. And sometimes I'll be right. Like when I said that I thought Ilia Topuria was going to go out there and uncrown Alexander Volkanovski, a guy I really respected, a guy that I had only bet against twice for a total of 1 unit risk prior to that. And then I bet multiple units on Ilia Topuria because I thought that he was so clearly the side in that fight. In this fight, I can't come up with as clear a side, right? Even the Max Holloway fight last time out, I thought that Max Holloway, we were looking at a clear potential side. With Max Holloway against Justin Gaethje, a guy that doesn't wrestle in his fights, a guy that I thought was at a grappling disadvantage if they took it there. And ultimately, you look at a guy that is going to get out-volumed if the fight stays on the feet. So what is he going to do? Knock out the great Max Holloway or probably lose the fight? And I was like, that seems like a good deal to me. And you look back, I've done a pretty good job of capping Holloway fights. So I'll bring the Holloway previous results up on screen so we're not talking out of our tuchus, right? We always want to refer to real results. But if we look back, Max Holloway has been a pretty good cap fighter for me. And if I am trying to recall, I think the 2 bets that I've missed on Max Holloway's career, okay? The only 2 track bets I've ever missed on his career. You guys can see this is right from my betmma.tips, which is published in every, YouTube description, right? If you look back, I bet Volk 3 units at minus 195 when everybody was telling you Max Holloway was value at plus 160. I was like, I thought I saw Max Holloway in the second fight with Volk give the best performance that he could possibly give against Volk, and he lost. And I was like, what are we going to see differently in the third one? Like he did everything perfect last time. I thought Volk underperformed. He overperformed and it didn't work out. So I was like, that was the time. That was the one he had to capitalize on. I didn't think, that when you looked at that third fight, it was even on paper. I was like, you got one guy who won the first one, used slickness and tactics. Then in the second one, responded to adversity, responded to some tough situations, found a way to gut it out and win, take back over late. And then you look at that third fight, and I had the ITD as well as the money line. And if you look at that ITD, it didn't work out, right? But Volk broke his hand. And if you look back, Max got his ass whooped in that fight. And his corner was basically had to talk him through like, yo, round 5, like, we're here. Like we got to stay in it. Like they had to give him a little bit of that pep talk because he was kind of getting demoralized a little bit in round 5. So that's the only thing that I could point to as like, the Max Holloway, like where could it all go wrong? Like I thought Volk was going to finish him and Volk came close, but he broke his hand. And I didn't think he could really put a stamp on that fight in the same way. Is Ilia Topuria a similar archetype of fighter? Yes, but not exactly. And the difference between the two is, number one, we know one thing about Alexander Volkanovski beyond a shadow of a doubt. You have to kill the man. You can knock him unconscious. We've seen that. But you have to kill him. If you put him in a deep submission, he's not giving it to you. You have to kill him. You have to choke him unconscious. You have to put him to sleep. You have to hit him with a shot that he can't recover from. Otherwise, he's going to fight you tooth and nail. He got dropped by Chad Mendes, got back up, and then walked him down with impunity and knocked him out. I was like, yo, this guy is a dogged competitor, but the writing was on the wall from the day he got to the UFC, who was going to beat him. The guy who could walk him down, the guy who could resist the wrestling, right? Because the other thing is, Volk, whenever he was in danger, ever in his fights, he was like, let's wrestle, let's grapple, let's find out right now, because he's so fucking strong. Right? He'll push you into the fence. He's a former 200-pound rugby player. You really want to find out who's stronger against the fence like that? He's probably going to win those. And he's got a low center of gravity. You're going to pick him up? Hard to do, right? You're going to get hooks in on him and shit. Ask Islam Makhachev. Not as easy as it looks. So it's like, okay, this guy Volkanovski's skilled in every position, but you can kill him. That's the way you get him. You kill him. Meanwhile, you got Max Holloway. What is the difference between the two? Max Holloway is the unkillable. The unkillable Max Holloway, the guy who doesn't really have those moments where you look back and you're like, oh my God, he got dropped so bad here. Like, there's few and far between in a career since he was 20. It's like, this guy's been fighting at the highest level since 20 years of age. He got finished in his debut against Dustin Poirier and never again. Like, unbelievable. Like, that's just a ridiculous resume. So you look at that and you juxtapose it with Ilia Topuria, has no, bad skill set. Like, where is he bad? He can fight on the feet like a G. He can walk forward. He can hurt people. Just like a Volkanovski, he could respond to adversity. He got dropped by Goncalves. He got dropped by Jai Herbert. He got back up and finished them brutally. So you look at the guy, he's not afraid of getting in a tough fight. But I do think he likes to know, I could kill switch this guy. I could hit him and he won't fucking move. And that's what he does really well, right? He's got power. He's got bricks for hands. I just worried to myself, like, if he goes out and swings and goes for the kill and does everything he's trying to do, number one, Max Holloway is a kickboxer. He's not a boxer. He's not the best boxer in the UFC. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. Ilia is a little bit of a better boxer, pure boxer, technique. Who's going to slip? Who's going to slide? Who's going to move in and out of range? Who's going to counter properly and do all the right mechanics? Probably Ilia. But where are all the problems in his striking fights? He gets kicked in the head because he's boxing. So he's boxing. He likes to box. He loves to box. And he likes to calf kick. It's not like he doesn't have these other tools. He can mix in these other kicks and what. That's not what he goes to. He likes to box. He likes to calf kick. So I think that those are great tools against Max Holloway. Look at what Volkanovski used against Max Holloway. It was mostly inside, outside low kicks, but they were tapping. This is the difference, right? Like, if you look at that, he was like, touch, 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 switch stance, move here, because then it's hard for Max to get a rhythm, a beat, to try and figure out where you're going to be, and it's hard to land. So for Max, everything is contingent on getting ahead on the strike count. Touch, 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 and go. Justin Gaethje is not afraid of getting into exchanges. That's why I was like, that's not going to end up well for you, okay? But then you look at this fight. I can see 100% a world in which either Ilia Topuria comes out and uses his strength, physicality, youth, and enthusiasm to come out and just bull rush Max Holloway, take him to the ground, out physical him. I could see that, but I can't see it at a high percentage, honestly, because I think Max is a really underrated wrestler and grappler over the course of his career. If you just look, he hasn't been tested that many times, but the guys who have tried, they've mostly failed really, really badly in trying to take him down. Frankie Edgar, one of the chief examples among them, right? A guy who was known for his wrestling and grappling, couldn't sniff a lick of success for 5 rounds against Max Holloway. So you look at this guy, he's pretty good at D'ing up the takedowns, okay? And then it's like, okay, if we can't get him to the ground, then it's probably going to be a long striking fight. And then I could see Ilia Topuria knocking him out in the first 2 rounds. Ilia says he's going to do it. I could see him doing it because he's extremely powerful. Max Holloway is a great fighter, but he's a guy who's willing to take risks. And I do think both these guys are extremely confident. So could we see them take some extra risks, take some chances? The one thing is, Max is talking about, like, I'm not going to do that with you. I'm going to approach this like a sophisticated guy. I'm not going to approach this like an idiot. And I thought he fought Gaethje very smart. I thought he did a lot of the right things. I thought he hid some of his weaknesses. And frankly, I thought if he wanted to mix in the wrestling and grappling there, he could have. But because it was a BMF fight, he didn't. So in this fight, I'm like, if you wanted to give a grappling advantage on paper, I give it to Topuria. He's a Greco-Roman wrestler. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's fantastic. He's got all these wins on the regional scene. He submitted Bryce Mitchell in the UFC, for fuck's sake. Like, the guy's good. But then you look at the Max Holloway side. I don't think he's going to get punked there. I really don't. I think it's possible that he could, but I just haven't seen a guy who looks like he's going to get punked there. And then I say to myself, okay, the alternative is it's a striking fight. And if it's a striking fight, like, Max Holloway is probably projected to land 150 plus significant strikes, even against Ilia Topuria, right? A guy who's this good, a guy who's this defensively sound. he still gets hit in his fights. You go back and look, he gets hit against most guys that he fights. And there's not a lot of examples of him just running away with the strike count. So he likes to exchange. He likes to get close to people and hit them with big shots that could turn them off. And I think that's live here. But the problem is Max Holloway is just like one of the most insane volume freaks in the history of the UFC. So I think when you look at how he approaches this fight, it's very like this fight and the co-main event to me have a very clear dynamic where if you were to say, all right, fight ends in the first 2.5 rounds, who wins it? I think we all agree like the much more likely outcome is that the younger guy with the big power that everybody is very high on is going to get the job done if that's the circumstance. But I think in these extended fights, when it comes down to who is willing to push that cardio basis, who's willing to do more output, we know that Max Holloway can do it 5 hard 5s with anybody, wrestling, grappling, striking, all of it, getting hurt badly, coming back out. The thing that remains in my mind is the image of him against Dustin Poirier, when Dustin Poirier just mushed his face in the 4th round. And Dustin is kind of a dickhead when he's fighting, right? You understand it. It's a dickhead business, but the guy is like he's pointing down, like doing Max's thing to him. Right. And Max didn't let it go. He gets back up with a smile on his face, starts pointing at the ground and saying, hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm still here, aren't I? He fought him how many years ago and got finished. Then he got the chance to do it again. It's an instant classic on short notice at 155 pounds. He's not afraid to fight anybody. So I do think that when you look at the matchup on paper, I give a lot of credit and respect to Ilia Topuria. I think at plus 154, it was a fucking insane line against Volkanovski. But styles make fights. And I do think that the Volkanovski and Max fight was a guy who is perfect at winning decisions against a guy who will probably go to decision with you more often than not. Right? Max knocked out Gaethje. He doesn't knock out everybody. He doesn't finish everybody. So you look at his game plans, he can definitely finish people with volume. He could break them down round 3, 4, 5. That's typically his hot zone. But when you look at these other fights, like he's more than willing to go out there and just outpoint somebody to a decision. And I do think that when you look at Ilia, that's not how he builds his game. He's not thinking about like, let me go out there and, outpoint him, outmaneuver him to a decision. He kind of did that against Josh Emmett, but he also tried to kill him 1,000,000 times and he almost did. I think he could do the same here, but Max is just a guy who's thinking about how do I win the round? How do I win the position? And that's exactly what Volkanovski does, but he's an insane game planner, technician, operator, and he just out-positioned, out-thought, out-game plan, out-everything to Max Holloway. That was how he got him. And this guy, Ilia, is not quite in the same way. Like Volk had to learn all these skills, put it all together, go from being a wrestler to being one of the best strikers in the UFC. And then meanwhile, Ilia, he was a very good wrestler and grappler who's kind of gotten away from that because now he's killing everybody with his hands on the feet. And he's an extremely dangerous boxer. But now he's taking on a guy who so far has been very hard to kill. That's just the one thing that stands out about a long career like this. So could he be the first to crack the code? Absolutely. I think he's the most likely to. I had said a long time ago, I thought it was a Yair, an Arnold Allen. Somebody who hits really hard is going to be the guy who cracks Max Holloway's chin. And Ilia hits harder than all those guys. But we still haven't seen it. And Justin Gaethje's a 155-pounder that hits like a fucking truck in his own right. And he landed some big shots on Max. And Max mostly no-sold him and then beat the shit out of him. So I think at 145, that's the X factor. He's cutting more weight. His brain could be a little bit dehydrated. That could be a bad thing for him. But if he shows up looking like the same guy he did at UFC 300, it's just a very hard guy to lay 2X against with anybody, So I think Topuria, great fighter, deserved favorite, a little bit too wide. What do you think?
Yeah, to knock like most people out, you gotta either hit him to the body, which we know Ilia is really good at, or you gotta catch him with a shot that they don't see coming, maybe the right hook, wink, wink. But I think in the situation of Max Holloway, Ilia would have to come to the octagon with a gigantic 2x4, and just absolutely crack him over the head. And even then, I still don't know if Max Holloway would go to sleep. So like literally one of my favorite fighters. I don't really generally have favorites, but this guy's definitely one of them. I thought the performance he had versus Arnold Allen was a great performance. A lot of people thought, Allen might be able to pull the upset against him. He gets the job done. Korean Zombie out. That was an amazing call. Was able to call the round 3. Obviously Zombie a little bit toward the end of his career. I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, but my man Yanni the Greek, he's a little bit more of a market guy, right? And what he said was that this should be closer to minus 300. He thinks Ilia wins 3 out of 4 times. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's like recency bias from the Gaethje fight. Do you think like that was just an insane performance for Max, and now we're having a not the price is being affected by that, or is Max just getting that much better, or is it a difference of because that third fight versus Alex, right? He definitely got beat pillar to post. I was there for that one, minus 200 Alex Volkanovski, but the first two fights were really close, man. Versus like you could have gave either of those fights to Max. So
the second fight is very, very close. I do think Volk won it 3-2, but I think that the two rounds that Max won were rounds that you remember where he dropped Volk, and the rounds that Volk won were like push him against the fence, outland him with knees to the thigh, short punches, calf kicks. Like it wasn't as dominant at all, even though he did. I thought he won 3 rounds to 2.
Yeah, man, it was a super close fight. So I think a lot of people could be counting out Max here, but I think there's also a lot of people that are super high on him after that Gaethje performance. But he's got the kicks, he's got crazy cardio, he's got an insane chin. So I don't know how you lay the price on Ilia here. He definitely has good grappling, good jiu-jitsu upside. I think he has the ability to possibly catch him with the same submission he was caught with prior. Like I like to look at that for the submission props. Like if the guy had been caught one way before and this guy has a triangle armbar, especially a submission like that on the record, I don't know if he's going to have a lot of takedown success here, but he definitely could hurt Holloway. And then when you're hurt, your grappling's not that good. And that's kind of, Dustin got him with a slick triangle setup. It was slick, bro. So.
And he was 20.
Yeah.
I think he was probably a purple belt.
That Dustin Poirier fight, man, he's been there with, I'm just starting to list off the names in my head, and he's literally been in there with the best fighters. Like, Ilia has some great wins, but definitely not near the level of competition. Don't think he's been in the wars like that Max has been in. So if this gets into rounds 4 or 5, I don't know if I want to be holding an Ilia minus, 265 he's at now. Great fighter, though. Got power.
Yeah. I think my only disagreement with the chat is like Ilia is the good, says Haunter, and I totally agree. I just don't think Max is not the goods. Like that's the only thing for me. Like I think Max is like an insanely good fighter, just in a different way, right? Like he has a different approach, a different style. He's not as lethal early, but he is a guy that's just hard to kill and builds into fights over time. And that's a good juxtaposition with a guy who tends to win early or starts to taper off just a little bit. And Yusuf Zalal was favored to beat Ilia Topuria because it was a short notice fight. And we've seen Topuria come a long way. But this is a guy, again, who's been an underdog 2 times in the UFC. And now he's heavily favored to beat Max Holloway, a guy who's been a dog 8 times in the UFC. And he's won 4 of them. So he's a guy that's produced for you as an underdog. Ilia Topuria never lost as a favorite. I do think VB might be spot on with this. But here's the other thing I will grant, VB. Is if Max Holloway wins this fight, like the world is at his feet, right? Like he could literally take any fight he wants next. After UFC 300, I thought the same, ball was in his court almost. Like go take a fight at 155 if you want it. Go take it at, 45 if you want it. And I think that for him, the fact that he called out Topuria after the fight was interesting and, kind of spoke volumes to me that this guy really wanted this challenge. And I do think he's biting off a big challenge. Like I think Max Holloway picked the hardest fight maybe that he could have taken right now, but I think he is that guy. And he said after the fight, he's like, I am that guy. There's a matador that's running away from a bull. Listen, I don't buy into the hype completely. I'm saying to myself, if Max gets sparked in 2 rounds, I'm not going to be surprised, but live betting Max Holloway, if he survives 2 rounds, I do think is probably plus EV because what we know about him is he pushes very, very hard and he's been hurt, come back before. And he's also just a guy that's difficult to hurt, difficult to kill, difficult to wrestle. Like where's the easy win against Max Holloway? I don't see it. So I think you can beat him. Ray's a beatable guy, but I don't think he's a guy to get an easy win over, honestly. So that's the way I see it, man. I think it's a great fight. I think it's one of the best fights on paper the UFC could make right now. I think they got the right guy favored. I think they got the right 2 guys. I just don't think Max Holloway is a pushover against almost anybody. And the reason I was willing to lay the minus 200 with Volk was because I had seen it. I had proof of concept. I knew Volk could go 5 hard 5s with a guy like this and beat him. And I was like, I don't have that with Ilia. I know that he could go 5 hard 5s and beat Josh Emmett, but would not Max Holloway be favored to do the exact same thing? I think he would be. And against Bryce Mitchell, I think Max would be favored. Like, I just don't know that he's gotten one win except for Volkanovski that would tell us this is a head and shoulders above matchup. The 5-year age gap, that's significant. The power differential, that's significant. But I think most of that matters in the front of the fight, the first 2 rounds. I think after that point, that's when it starts to come down to heart, conditioning, technique. And I think Max can then compete, right? So for me, fun fight, great scrap, weird fight, but for me, I can't ignore a guy like Max Holloway. I bet both these guys as dogs in their last fight. And I think that you just have 2 really good fighters here. So taking the guy at plus money for me would always be my preferred option. Now, that being said, may just pass on the fight, especially pre-fight, but I'll have some money in the account set aside, in case we have to fire on Max Holloway live if the fight's going well for him. So
I'll tell you what I think I would look for is who starts to get their jab off first, because I think that's really where this fight's going to be. Obviously we set up everything with the jab in boxing and in MMA, and I think that's going to be the key strike in this. If you see Ilia getting off a ton of jabs, that's going to be a problem, because that's going to set off the power shots. And if we see Max just jabbing him from range, hitting him with side kicks, teep kicks, well, now we know Max has got the range, and it's going to be, Ilia's job to come back into the fight. So I think that's where the fight's decided. And personally, what my read on the fight is, like what I think happens is it's close to similar to that second Volk fight where it's just a banger scrap back and forth. Ilia probably cracks Max with some shots where you're like, how the hell did he take that? But Max seems to stay in the fights, maybe steals a couple of the later rounds. Ilia tough enough to survive. I think we see some grappling in between all of that, and I think you get a 48-47 for Ilia Topuria. That's my read on the fight. Max goes to 155, does his thing, just like VB was saying, because that's a clear path for him. You still have a star in Ilia Topuria that's at 145. But, man, if Max could do it, then that's just huge as well, right? Sets up rematches for him. He's got the 145, the BMF, and then wouldn't be shocked to see him fight Islam Makhachev at that point.
Yeah, and I truly believe in Ilia Topuria. Like, if he loses this fight, I think he will win the championship again. Like, I think he's that good of a fighter, but there's some guys that are good enough to come back and win UFC titles, and they're very few and far between. But a 32-year-old Max Holloway seems like a candidate, right? Like, he just seems like a guy that I don't want to count out in this kind of opportunity. And I'm telling you, like, just look at the guys he's fought throughout his career. Murderer's row from the very outset. This guy has just been in there with killer after killer, and more often than not, he's come up aces. You look at his track record in the UFC. He's 26-7 as a professional, guys, 22-7 in the UFC. So 7 losses, the vast majority of them against UFC champions. Lost to Volk by split and by split and 2 unanimous decisions. Lost a unanimous decision against Poirier, and he lost the unanimous decision against Conor McGregor. Lost a split decision against Dennis Bermudez. Yo, let me just say, Section 9, stand the fuck up, baby. That's Saugerties, New York. What's up with it? New York boys taught him how to wrestle. Y'all know that. But anyways, we go back, lost to Dustin Poirier via triangle armbar. That's everything. Okay, that's all the losses. He lost a split decision to Dennis Bermudez when he was still growing his first facial hairs. And then you look back since then, like, the guy has only lost to champions. Like, he is a really formidable fighter. And I think that's just hard for me to look past, right? Like, I think Ilia, if he wins this fight, you just fucking take your hat off to the guy and say, God bless him. He fucking deserved to be here. He earned it. He took the championship like a gangster. But if you look at who he's most compared to, it's Conor McGregor. Meteoric rise, fast through the division, all this stuff. You know who lost their very next fight after they won the belt? Conor Mack. You know why? He was a little arrogant. He was having a lifestyle. He had a lot of people around him that were telling him how good he was and all the blowing smoke right up his ass. And then he takes a fight on short notice, right? It was a different fight, a different look. So I'm not comparing it 1-to-1, but I'm just saying Conor was on top of the world. Everybody was fucking telling him exactly how good he was, and he started to believe it. And he went out there and tried to kill somebody early, and then he was exhausted at the 2.5-minute mark of the second round, and he gave it up against Nate Diaz. That's exactly what we saw, right? And is Nate Diaz better than Conor McGregor? Is that what we saw? Is that the takeaway that we had from that? It wasn't mine, but Conor overlooked him, came in like a jackass, firing too heavy, throwing too much, gassed himself out, and made a mistake. Is Luke Rockhold worse than Michael Bisping? I think the answer to that is obviously not. Right? I think the answer to that is obviously not. But when you look at that fight, he was arrogant. He went out there with his fucking chin up in the air and he's like, what are you going to do? Hit me or something? And then he got hit and he got knocked out because it's a fist fight between 2 grown ass men. And when you look at this fight, people looked at Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje and they said, Max is going to get hurt. Like, we can't book this fight. Max is going to get hurt. This is what everybody was saying. Do you remember this? They were like, he's going to have brain damage. Like, Justin Gaethje is going to put him in the hospital. It's going to be all these things. And who went to the hospital? Who's been out for all this time? Who took the dirt nap there? I'm not trying to be morbid, but like, it was Justin Gaethje all the way. And people were worried for Max's health. And then he put the guy on a stretcher, basically. Like, Max Holloway is a dangerous man, and maybe people are forgetting that because he's a nice guy and he's got the fun personality and shit too. But like, when that cage door closes, he's a bad motherfucker. He stopped Jose Aldo with strikes twice in a row, and I feel like people are not remembering that. Right? He beat the absolute tar out of Brian Ortega when Brian Ortega was favored. People don't remember this. Ortega was favored to beat Max Holloway, minus 120, plus 100. Max Holloway is giving him boxing lessons in round
literally
4.
teaching him how to throw a jab, bro.
So I'm just saying, guys, like, that was a pivotal example of market says this guy is the goods, and he wasn't. He just didn't have it. Now, am I comparing these two guys? No, they're obviously of a different level. But here's the other thing: Max Holloway is still that fucking guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, you just go back and look. Like, Max Holloway said after his last fight, "I'm him. I am him." And like, look at the evidence. Like, yeah, like Ilia Topuria is him too. These guys are both the fucking man. So that's why I'm just not ready to anoint one as the GOAT over the. It's like, let's find out on Saturday. I do think we've got a immovable force. Against I'm fucking up the expression, but you know what I'm saying, my man. The immovable force and the
something object. I think it's the
dude, exactly. Thank you. Liam, we both hammered Max against Gaethje. It was epic. My fucking dog, BB. I love that. It's the greatest cash of all time because of the last second ITD. I had plus 950, guys. It closed like plus 450, and I had already shipped that money down the river. I was like, fuck, it's a decision. I should have known. I was like, the submission was a donation. I'm a fool. And then he killed him, man. I think that you look at this fight and it's fireworks. It's a great fight. It's one of the best in MMA, but I just can't get past, a guy like Max Holloway, as good in his quality, as long as proven, just 32 years of age, right? He's not an old man. And I think that both these guys are quality ass fighters. So for me, fucking electric. Robert Whittaker, Khamzat Chimaev. Dude, I've been doing research. I've been doing deep dives on this. I just come away like less convicted than I used to be about Chimaev. I had Chimaev inside the distance against Usman. I was like, this is fucking easy bread. Like, Usman's too small. He's going to get on his back in the first round. He's going to own him, right? And if you look at that fight, everything was playing out according to my plan, right? I was like, he's going to take him down. He's going to get his back. He's going to dominate. And then Usman like falls forward, and like, I believe that he hurt his wrist and his hand on that exchange. I think he like landed on his hand awkwardly. He never regripped for a choke again the rest of the fight. Okay. So I kind of feel like that was what killed me there. You know, he was doing good. He was landing some shots. He went for the choke, and then he just got slammed onto his hand. I think he based out and hurt his wrist, and he just didn't have the same gripping mechanics. But if you look at this fight with Whittaker, I think he absolutely is live to submit him early. I think the DDP fight is a clear example of how Whittaker can get flat-backed and get into bad positions on the mat. I think also we look at the fight with Yoel Romero. We see other examples of that. But the one thing I will note is against Usman, he wasn't able to get the finish early, and then he started having to default to, all right, let me wrestle to get on top. Let me wrestle to control. Let me just be a little bit more passive with this control. I don't think that's going to work over 5 against Robert Whittaker. Like, Robert is just a guy that keeps a pretty damn high pace. And you look at those Yoel Romero fights, they were granted a little bit longer ago. So you want to give a little bit of, hey, you know, maybe things have changed. But if you look back at those fights, he gave Yoel Romero hell despite being, you know, almost knocked out in the first round and all these things. You can go back and look. The guy is just a born fighter. When he's out there, he got nearly knocked out by Israel Adesanya. He got nearly knocked out by Darren Till, and he just starts fighting the fuck back. And then those guys break down the stretch. They can't keep up with him. They lose the decision. He's a really impressive guy. On the other side, Khamzat Chimaev is way more impressive than him for 10 minutes. It's not even close in my view, right? Like, Rob can knock people out. He's a dangerous striker, but you look, he can't dominate people the way that Chimaev can, right? Chimaev can do things that most people can't do. He picks people up, he throws them around, he dominates them physically. But he is basically capped at doing that for 10 minutes, guys. And I don't say that from like, you know, Chimaev, right? Like, oh, this guy. It's like, no, I've said it a million times on the show. There's a reason wrestling matches are 7 minutes. They're not 25 minutes. unless your name's Merab Dvalishvili, you can't wrestle for 25 minutes, right? And even then, look at the periods of break he took against O'Malley. Look at round 5, backing up, giving ground. He's like, needing a couple of deep breaths because it's very hard to keep up that pace rate. So Chimaev, killer early, killer with he has an ability to knock him out as well. But what's the track record at 185 that's like 100% certainty we're going out there and anointing this guy the next champion? At 170, his physicality is ridiculous. Like, who's going to stop that, right? It's very difficult to imagine. But at 185, like, what, he dummied Kevin Holland. So fucking what? Like, so did Roman Dolidze. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, let's go through the list. So did Derek Brunson. Almost put him out with a head and arm choke, had it for 4 minutes. Like, you just look back. A lot of guys have done that at 185. So what does that tell you? He knocked out GM3 with one punch. So did Ian Heinisch, right? Like, if we just want to call a spade, Chimaev is a fucking special talent. But this is how you have to look when people are minus 250. You have to just try and peel back. Is there anything I'm missing here? Is there anything that could go wrong? And the one thing about Chimaev is Eric Nixick, interviewed this week, says the guy was in my gym coughing up blood. That's not a very promising health outcome, right? The guy has been back and forth. He got an operation of some kind done in Chechnya that we're not super aware of exactly what happened there. Maybe some of the translations aren't super clear. So he's having procedures. He's having long COVID. He's having spit up attacks of blood while he's training at Extreme Couture in the States. There's a lot of things that just point to this guy's health has deteriorated. And if you don't believe me, believe the press conferences. Dana White says after, he's like, the guy's ill. The guy can't make it. The guy's unwell. The guy can't fight. The guy needs to get his health in order. The guy's defying doctor's orders and coming back to train too quick. So then he can't make it through, going up the stairs. And when you look at those kind of factors, like, I don't want to buy into Robert Whittaker, a guy I've tried to fade many times because he's fighting, and he's a big underdog, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I want to be very cognizant of, hey, am I overcorrecting the steering wheel? I've always said that Robert Whittaker is a little bit chinny. He is. I've always said that Robert Whittaker could be exploited by better wrestlers and grapplers. And then DDP went out there and proved me right. I had the plus 300. But now you look at a fight where it's like, okay, the guy who clearly on paper has better cardio, ABCs, is Robert Whittaker. The guy who has more championship experience, pedigree, Robert Whittaker. This guy Khamzat Chimaev, I have a tape study that I did, and I'll bring it up because I just want people to know that I don't try and just talk for the sake of talking, right? I'm not here just to be loquacious and say more fucking words. I'm here to try and just give a wide breadth of analysis, and then you guys can make of that what you will. Chimaev went up 6-0 on Jack Hermanson in a wrestling match that they had in the first period. And I watched the whole thing. I taped it in depth, like a nerd, because this is how I am. And if you look back, the first period, he was doing well. He's throwing him around. He's being physical. This is against the 185 pounders. So there's your little proof of concept, right? But then you go down and you say, okay, Chimaev pace seems to have slowed a bit. Not trying the explosive offense, controlling and maintaining position, holding center. Chimaev fires an outside single leg. Jack defends well, feeds him hips, and re-enters his own double leg against the fence. So you're saying that 3 minutes into a wrestling match, this guy is starting to fatigue. Yes, that's what I'm saying. And when I look at that footage, right? How serious did he fucking train for that fight? Like, it's a wrestling match with Jack Hermanson. He probably thought he was going to pin him in the first period. And then when the guy was still alive, he was like, you know what, whatever. I'll win 6-0 and just move on with my life. So he got it done. But did I come away from, the footage I've seen of Chimaev at 185 and said, like, nobody can stop this guy? I thought Israel Adesanya cupcake matchup. I was like, yo, give him Izzy and we will be in business. But it's like, they actually gave him a harder fight. Like, if you look at Robert Whittaker, he's a harder stylistic matchup, in my opinion, than Adesanya. Why? Adesanya doesn't want to wrestle. He doesn't want to grapple. And as soon as it happened against Duplessis, he looked like he was out of sorts, right? When a guy who really knows his stuff got him to the ground, he didn't want it. And when you look at this fight, I'm like, Robert Whittaker, the one thing that you could say about him, he's pretty hard to kill, man. Even that fight against Izzy, he gets knocked out in round 1. He still comes out for round 2. Like, he gets knocked out in round 1 against Duplessis, in my humble opinion, and he came back out for round 2. So the guy's willing to take his just desserts, right? He might get finished brutally in this fight, but you just know that he's got great preparation. He's got great cardio. He's got a lot of 5-round experience, championship consistency. He lost some minutes and positions against the likes of Jerry Cannonier, but he found a way to win against these tough guys, these guys who hit hard, these guys that really wanted this opportunity. So I'm like, man, he slammed the door in a lot of guys' faces. I don't take the Ikram fight as being very, meaningful here, but both these guys, knocked out Ikram in impressive fashion. I thought Ikram was blinded by the lights. I didn't think he wanted to be there. But I'm like, okay, now you've got Chimaev, who pulled out of the last fight. If anything, I think that improves the confidence on Robert Whittaker. He's like, this guy didn't even want to fight with me. And by the way, in a wrestling tournament, DQ, this guy's out, right? He forfeited. So this guy advances. Shout out to Chael Sonnen. I do kind of agree with that logic sometimes when it comes to contendership cues, right? And Robert Whittaker's like, why the fuck do I have to still fight this guy when he didn't even want to fight me last time? So now I'm saying, okay, as a Rob Whittaker hater, I could see the path to him losing, right? Like round 1 and round 2, he got bullied by DDP. But again, DDP, what do we know about it? He's a fucking proven middleweight. Very proven. Goes out there and goes and competes with all these guys. On the feet, on the ground. He took down Strickland 6 times. Nobody had done that since Kamaru Usman at 170, 6 years prior or whatever. So you just look, this guy is clearly the goods at 185, and he's beaten former champions and he's done all the right things. And meanwhile, it's like everybody discounts his skill set and his credibility. And like this guy, Robert Whittaker, looked like he had an off night to me against Duplessis. Because I will say, as a Duplessis backer, I thought Duplessis was going to win. I didn't think he was going to fucking throw him around on his head, and just make it look easy in the wrestling. Rob initiated the clinch, and I don't think he saw that coming at all. I think he was surprised that guy tried to take him down, and I think he got hurt really quickly on the ground and never had a chance to recover. That's the way I saw it. So I think in this fight, there's a chance that the exact same thing plays out. I would not bet Rob pre because there's a chance you're just going to watch your money evaporate in 2 minutes. But I think the live entry, again, after 7.5 minutes on Rob, definitely something I would consider here, because you look at the Gilbert Burns fight and this guy did get dropped with a left hook. By the way, Robert Whittaker likes to come over the top with that left hook. He likes to counter the jab with that left hook. He's got head kicks, right? He's going to look to try and take you out with big single shots that could finish the fight. And if you stay on the feet with him, he's going to be dangerous. He's going to throw volume. He's going to compete. If you take it to the ground with him, you're risking that you go out there, spend your 10 minutes of energy, and then you're out there with a guy who's dangerous for 15 more minutes, and you don't have the same cardio to push. So for me, I think that you have a huge upside early for Chimaev. I think Chimaev by sub makes a lot of sense, right? I think that you look at, plus 270 or whatever it is, like he could win by knockout, but I think more often than not, even if he hurts Rob, he will try to get a submission hold in place personally. And that's just because I think of Rob as a really tough guy and a guy who's been hurt a million times and gotten back off the hook. So I would instantly try and put him in a choke and put him to sleep if I had him hurt. That's just the way I would approach it if I was fighting him. But, lucky it's not me, because that guy's a dangerous guy and he seems highly motivated for this fight. I will say that as well. What do you think about this one, my man?
I think it's a banger. It kind of reminds me of the main event, the last card. I think it's early Khamzat Chimaev, late Robert Whittaker. I don't personally think the fight goes the distance, but if it does, I tend to favor like a close decision. Yeah, man. I'm pretty tired though. I'm not gonna lie to you. And,
dude, peace out. Get your rest.
Go to bed, bro.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your thoughts, and I'm sure that the chat does as well.
I'll give you my quick prediction for the fight. I think it's probably going to be an early either KO or sub for Khamzat. I just think he's too dangerous early on, and the sprinklers are starting to come on. So that's how I know it's past my bedtime, bro.
Hey, peace, love, and chicken grease, my brother. Always that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Until next time, my man. Good luck on all your bets. We appreciate you.
You too, my boy. Appreciate you.
Hell yeah. And with that being said, guys, it's just me. You're stuck with me now. We've had a couple great guests, but we still got a couple of fights that we want to touch base on real quick. So we talked about the main event. We talked about the co-main event. I'll give you guys my quick thoughts on Ankalaev and Rakic. If I was to get to a money line side here, simply put, I'd have to be on the Rakic side. It's over 3-1. We're looking at a guy who was favored against a former champion, Yuri Prohaska, in his last fight. I don't think Rakic is a bad fighter. I just think that he has a limited skill set where he can go out there and either try and pressure wrestle somebody, but he doesn't have the cardio to sustain it very well, or he can throw calf kicks and high kicks and potentially finish the fight, or potentially gas out trying to finish the fight. And you look at the Yuri Prohaska fight, I was very proud of my write-up for that fight. I'm going to look it up right now, and I'll pull it up for you guys so that way you could see what I'm seeing. But I picked Yuri Prohaska via KO in round 1 or in round 2. And this was on the UFC 300 preliminary portion. It was the prelim headliner, if you guys remember. Now you're seeing a Rakic elevated to the main card despite losing via knockout. And I think that has a lot to do with his opponent. in Ankalaev. But what I'm about to do is show you this on the screen so that way you guys can have an idea of what I'm talking about. And I try to not let recency bias influence me too much. And one of the tools that I use to do that is I look back at my previous write-up. So before this fight was ever announced, I look at what I had to say about these fighters. And when you look at this fight, I had said that I thought Prochazka was, quote, not a very process-oriented fighter, but he is dangerous in every phase. He is a dangerous threat on offense, and he has a never-say-die attitude. Unless Rakic can land a signature head kick to shut off Yuri, incapacitate him with low kicks, or grind him out for a full 15 minutes with takedowns, I think he will be getting backed up with pressure and insane blitzes, and he will eventually capitulate to the Czech Samurai. And capitulate he did in round 2, as it was written. I felt very proud of this write-up. And I think that Rakic, that is his downside. That is his downfall. He is a good bully. He is a good hammer. He is a bad nail. And I think he always has been. When you look back, I don't think that his wins have aged very well. He's not been very competitive in terms of activity. He does look like he's $1 million in terms of physicality. He's got, probably some steroids coursing through his veins if I just had to make an educated guess. But if you look at Alexander Rakic, I'm going to share my screen on Tapology. He lost via TKO against Yuri Prochazka. That was in April of this year. Prior to that, he hadn't fought since 2022, where he had a leg injury. He had to get surgery on his knee. Then he fought Thiago Santos to an remarkable unanimous decision victory in 2021 that people were not blown away by. He beat Anthony Smith, who he crippled with low kicks via unanimous decision in 2020. And Smith has always been a mark for the low kick. And then you look at Volkan Ozdemir, and Volkan Ozdemir, takes a split decision off him. He's a talented guy. You could give him a pass there. But the win over Manawan, no longer with the promotion. Beautiful head kick. One of the most aesthetic knockouts in UFC history. But is he going to do it with a surgically repaired knee? I'm not sure. Then you look at the Devin Clark fight. Devin Clark is, simply put, not very good, right? He was a very average UFC fighter, about a 500 clip, maybe a little bit sub 500. And Devin Clark went out there, landed a big shot in round 1, then fell forward into like a turtle position and got finished. It's a completely ridiculous fight if you go back and watch it. Then you look at the Justin Ledet fight, another guy who did not last in the UFC. Francimar Barroso, another guy who did not last in the UFC. So a lot of his wins have not aged well. Anthony Smith is the only guy that he has fought that is still with the promotion that he has a win over, as far as I know. And Thiago Santos is a little bit on the struggle bus at this point in his career. So when I look at this fight, I say to myself, listen, Rakic at 6-3 in the promotion. He is a guy that you can't, just write off. He did have a long time out of the octagon, and now he's getting his activity rate back up. So if Ankalaev comes out and takes a lot of risks, like people expect him to, knowing that he wants this title shot that's on the line, you do have a guy who's bigger and a guy who's the same age roughly in Alexander Rakic at a big plus money distinction. So I think live underdog Alexander Rakic. However, I think if you're on the Ankalaev side, the way I'm looking to play this is Ankalaev by KO or Ankalaev in rounds 2 and rounds 3. When you look at Rakic, I do think he's a capitulator. I think he will give up down the stretch if you give him resistance. And I think Ankalaev throws with a lot of power. He has gotten late finishes before in the UFC. He punted Dolce Lungiambula in the face, late in that fight in the 3rd round. And Ankalaev basically said, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to finish this guy and I'm going to get my title shot and prove I'm the best in the world. If you're talking like that, I think you need the knockout. I don't think the decision's going to cut it. I don't think Dana's going to be happy with that either. So I think that this is going to be Ankalaev probably going out there and looking to put hands on this guy, Alexander Rakic, and finish him. For me, I think it's a fun scrap, an interesting scrap, a meaningful scrap. But ultimately, I just can't trust a guy like Rakic, who I think will capitulate when the going gets tough. And I think that Magomed Ankalaev isn't the greatest brain thinker to back at minus 400. Sometimes he goes out there and lays eggs in terms of, his fighting process. He got triangled late by Paul Craig in what looked to be a fixed fight. But in any case, Ankalaev has been pretty difficult to beat throughout his career. And he went to a draw with Blachowicz that really tanked his stock. But Jan Blachowicz has beaten good guys like Adesanya. He finished Dominic Reyes when he was a big underdog as well. So I think that we have to give a lot of credit and respect there. Next up, guys, let's talk about this 145-pound fight. There's a lot of really sharp guys I respect on the Lerone Murphy side, and I do think he's an impressive guy. I do think he's a very talented fighter, but You got two guys who are roughly the same age here, slightly bigger fighter in Lerone Murphy. I think he's also the guy who's going to do a little bit more in terms of volume with the striking. But I think there's a path to victory for Dan Ige, which is either clipping this guy on the chin. I do think Dan Ige throws very hard. I think he's got real power in the boxing. He hurt Diego Lopez in the third round and tried to walk him down with impunity, had a lot of success. You look at Dan Ige's career, he basically takes a round off of everybody he fights except for Movsar Evloev. The guy is just a consistent gamer, a guy who wants to go out there and earn a spot, earn a position. And at 33 years of age, he really doesn't have a lot of time left. On the other side, Lerone Murphy, he doesn't have the same fight miles either in the UFC or professionally, but he is getting up there in age himself, especially at featherweight. These guys could both age out before their prime if they are not careful. Now, Lerone Murphy is on the cusp of, a big fight, a number one contenders fight, title contention, something like this, but he's got to get through a guy like Dan Ige in order to get there. I think that when you look at Lerone Murphy's background, he's definitely a good fighter, but it's not like he's given you no cause for concern throughout his run. What I mean by that, let's talk about it. He beat Edson Barbosa via unanimous decision. I think that's one of his most impressive wins. I think you look back, Dan Ige has a win that was closer against Edson Barbosa, but Edson was younger and fresher at the time he fought Dan Ige, so I don't know exactly what to make of that. You look at the Culibao win. I like Josh Culibao. He's a tough guy. He's a gamer, but he's 3-4-1 draw in the UFC. I bet him in that draw against Charles Jourdain. So he's a guy that has, not had very positive run out of results in the UFC, just calling a spade a spade. You look at Gabriel Santos. Gabriel Santos, guys, just got on the board. He's now 1-2 in the UFC, but he lost a fight via split decision against our guy, Lerone Murphy, and it was a very close fight. I thought it easily could have went to Santos. Santos got takedowns. He got, a good position several times in the fight. He just ultimately was not able to consolidate enough top position or do enough damage to win, but he did some damage on the feet, and he also had a lot of success in the wrestling and grappling. When you look at the takedown defense of Lerone Murphy, it's simply not good enough. He got taken down many times by Makwan Amirkhani. He got taken down many times by Gabriel Santos. And he also, had some, I think he got knocked down by Zubaira Tukhugov. So when you look back, like the guy has just had some moments of vulnerability. His win as a big favorite was against Douglas Silva de Andrade. He's a guy that's already went to a draw once. He's gone to split decision. I just think there's enough cause for concern here against a talented vet, a guy who's been 5 rounds many times, a guy who's been in main events many times for the UFC. I just think Dan Ige has more relevant experience to fall back on. And I think that as good as Lerone Murphy is, his path to winning here is either to be the first guy to finish Dan Ige, or he's going to have to go out there and out hustle and outpoint a guy who's very sound. And I do think he could do that. I think he should be favored to do it. But again, I think in this fight, he should have been favored, like minus 150, as opposed to the big price that he's at right now. And when you look at Dan Ige on the other side, I do think Dan Ige has power in his hands. I think he can knock out Lerone Murphy. I don't think it's high percentage, but I think Dan Ige can knock out most guys, right? And I think when you look back, the fights are frustrating because Dan Ige does not throw enough. But in round 3 against Diego Lopez, he was going wild. In a couple of these fights, he gets a hold of guys. He starts taking them down. He starts going for these things. But a lot of the guys he's fought are better wrestlers and grapplers than he is, right? If we go back through the resume, Dan Ige's got some, high school wrestling. He's got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but the guy has just been out-decisioned so many times, right? So 7 and 8 career to the decision. That is his big flaw, his big vulnerability. But against Diego Lopes, guys, he went for a takedown and nearly had it, but Diego Lopes went for a guillotine and was able to roll out of it. Do we expect Lerone Murphy to roll out of a takedown attempt with a guillotine? I'm not sure, right? Like I don't necessarily see that. Then you see the Andre Fili fight. He absolutely killed him. Bryce Mitchell out-wrestled him, out-hustled him a little bit to the decision. But again, I think to myself, like, who is better at pure grappling and wrestling, Bryce Mitchell or Lerone Murphy? I would think Bryce Mitchell based on what we saw with Lerone Murphy and Makwan Amirkhani. Then you look at the fight. Okay, Nate Landwehr. Dan Ige went out there with another dog, with another guy who wants to bite down and throw, and he beat him. He got the win. Then Damon Jackson, he absolutely put him in the box. He lost to Movsar Evloev, top 5 guy. Josh Emmett, top 10 guy. Chan Sung Jung, top 10 guy. And a couple of those were, longer fights, extended fights, like the fight with Chan Sung Jung, a 5-round fight where he landed some good shots, where he had some success in that fight. And Chan Sung Jung had to wrestle and grapple to get through the fight, right? He was starting to get hurt a little bit in round 5, and he was like, fuck this. I'm just taking him down, taking his back. So I think when you look at this fight, I respect both these guys. I called Lerone Murphy the dark horse of the featherweight division at one point in his career. But he's 33 years of age and he just doesn't have the same level of consistency and activity. So I think we got the right guy favored, and I think the price is prohibitive. So for me, it's a dog or pass situation. All right, guys, we got Shara Magomedov and Armen Petrosyan. This is another fight where they've set up Shara Magomedov in such a way that he's probably going to get the kind of fight he wants. Armen Petrosyan represents, hey, my guy, Kyle, appreciate you, dog. Thank you very much for the support, brother. You know my motive. But in any case, we've got a Shara Magomedov who looks like, the popular side, right? He looks like the A side on social media. He's the guy the UFC's getting behind. They're putting him in movies. They're calling him a pirate. They're calling him the Bullet. They got all these cool nicknames for him. Meanwhile, Armen Petrosyan, I think people forget, he claimed he got poisoned when he went to fight Adolfo Vieira in Brazil. The guy got submitted. He's had a couple of difficult fights. He's a great, or I should say he's a very solid kickboxer. He's a very willing striker. He'll go out there and contend on the feet with most guys, but a lot of his offense relies on kicking. He does like to go out there and kick the legs a lot. He fought Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez to a very close decision that he was able to get the win. But when you look back, that's one of RoboCop's 2 losses. We talked about Bruno Ferreira was able to catch him on the chin. This guy, Armen Petrosyan, was able to take him via split decision. But we have to, just keep in the back of our mind, he was a plus 150 underdog there, and it was a very close, controversial decision at the time. I have had a pretty decent job of betting on this guy, Armen Petrosyan's fight. So we'll share this tab. And I bet Kalen Kolev against him on the Contender Series, and that was a really bad bet, guys. If you guys watched, Kalen Kolev got starched, and I thought he was going to wrestle in that fight, and he just couldn't wrestle this big-ass Petrosyan, and he got messed up. But then you look at the other fights. Armen Petrosyan against RoboCop Rodriguez, 2 units at plus 150. He got the win via split decision. And then Caio Barajo, 2.8 units against Armen Petrosyan. I thought he was going to finish that one, and unfortunately, he was not able to do so. But you look at this guy, Armen Petrosyan, and typically speaking, he's a pretty durable guy. He's been finished once via strikes, so that's always possible again, right? He's fighting a very talented striker here. He got beat by Hassan Yousefi, 7-3-1 back at AMC Fight Night. Now the guy is 8-5-1. Looks like an Iranian gentleman, I believe. So ultimately, what we had is a guy in Armen Petrosyan who can compete on the feet, but he's probably going to give you the fight you want. He's not going to mix in too much wrestling and grappling. He's not going to show you too many layers. And the one thing I think that's a negative about his kickboxing style against Shara is that he could just get outkicked by a better kicker at range. I think if he chooses to bite down on the mouthpiece and punch this guy and get in the pocket with him, I think that's actually his best chance to win. I think he can hurt Shara in that kind of fight. I think he can at least back him up to the fence. I think that when you look at how Armen Petrosyan has fought a couple of these guys, he does have wins over Christian Leroy Duncan as a dog, Gregory Rodriguez as a dog. Those are pretty impressive, solid wins. But on the other side of things, lost to Caio Barajo, lost to Adolfo Vieira. So he's been doing, he's been on the struggle bus against the Brazilians. And now he's got a guy in Shara Magomedov who's 14-0, undefeated. He's had a bunch of mixed rules fights. He's 11-0 to the knockout, but he's been winning a bunch of decisions in the UFC. And Bruno Silva resorted to takedowns. Michal Oleksiejczuk resorted to takedowns. If this guy, Armen Petrosyan, goes out there and attempts takedowns, he has a good chance to win. But I don't think he's going to do it. So I think he's probably going to make this very close. I think it's probably going to be split decision type territory. And I think that people might think Petrosyan got the job done, and they might just give it to Shara Bullet anyway, because Shara Bullet's the A side. And I think it's going to be a close fight in his neck of the woods. And also, these guys are former sparring partners. And I always just feel weird about fights like that because I don't know if they're buddy-buddy. I don't know if they're going to go out there and try and hurt each other or just play grab ass and patty cake and, just touch gloves for 15 minutes. So for me, this fight has pass written all over it. But if I was to get involved, I guess I would have to say I'd be looking at, a split decision. I'd be looking at maybe a Petrosyan decision. But I do think more often than not, this fight goes the distance. I think that you could see either guy win on the cards, but I think that you got to just default to Shara in that regard, not on skills, but on context and situation. I think the skills are quite close and comparable. I think the physical attributes may favor Shara in terms of both legs dexterity and also speed. Okay, guys, let's move along to the next fight here. And we're going to switch back to Tapology, we've got Ibo Aslan and Rafael Cerqueira. I think that there's a range of outcomes here. I think Rafael Cerqueira could be a complete bust, but right now, I think that he's got some upside in this matchup, right? Like he comes from Galpa de Luta, which is a gym in Brazil that's produced the likes of Eduardo Moura, Gelton Almeida in the UFC. And this guy's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu out of that gym. So I anticipate that despite only 2 professional wins on his resume via submission, I think he's got a chance to win this fight via submission, right? I think Ibo Aslan is not a very good grappler. I think that he's gotten better in terms of defensive grappling from the time when he got exposed by Anton Turkalj in a short notice fight on the regional scene. But I also think that when you look back, you could see that Ibo Aslan was able to D up a lot of the takedowns from Turkalj in their rematch in the UFC, but you also saw that Turkalj landed a lot of clean strikes to his face. He was not very defensively responsible. He wore a lot of damage in that fight, and Turkalj went 0-4 in the UFC. He did not prove himself at any point to be a UFC level fighter. He got out-positioned, out-hustled, and thrown around by Vitor Petrino to the tune of 7 takedowns to 5. And then he got 0 takedowns on Ibo Aslan, right? So I think that when you look at Rafael Cerqueira, if he goes out there and fights this fight on the feet, I think it's going to look like a pick'em fight. I think that Ibo Aslan has power. I think that Rafael Cerqueira has power. I think Ibo is probably a little bit more assertive on the feet. I would give him that credit. At 34 years of age, it's now or never for Cerqueira. And I have this gut feeling that Cerqueira has kind of kept his ground game close to his vest. Most of his fight footage is not available online. You can only find 2 full fights of this guy and some highlight packages. But I think that if this guy goes out there with the intent to wrestle and grapple and take this guy to the ground, he could look like a massive hindsight favorite just because Ibo Aslan is 13-1, but he's never really been tested in the wrestling and grappling. The guys that did test him in the wrestling and the grappling were Anton Turkalj, who's not a UFC level fighter. And so for Cerqueira, he's a complete unknown, right? In terms of he fought on a pretty low level regional scene in Brazil, but he looks to have a lot of the right elements and he looks to be in great shape, potentially on some supplementation as well. So for me, I kind of like the Rafael Cerqueira side, and from a prop standpoint, I'll leave it there. Then you look at Jeff Neal and RDA. We talked about, I think, fun fight, good scrap. What fights did we miss? We missed Kennedy Nzechukwu and Chris Barnett. So we'll talk about that one right now. If you look at this fight, I think Kennedy Nzechukwu is just not a trustworthy fighter, but Chris Barnett is also a really hard guy to get behind, right? He's way smaller than Kennedy in this fight in terms of both his reach, right? 8 inches of reach he's giving up to Nzechukwu. Also his height, 5'9" compared to 6'5". I mean, just a massive differential. He's 6 years younger as well. So every intangible box that you could possibly check is in favor of Kennedy Nzechukwu here. The problem is he's a -800 favorite here. He was a -700 favorite against OSP last time out, and he lost. The fight before that, he was a -145 against Dustin Jacoby. He got KO'd in the first round. I think that this guy is just not a trustworthy guy at the price. I think that the way that I would look to invest is either looking at one of his props or passing or taking the underdog, right? I don't think Chris Barnett is a great underdog bet this week, unfortunately, just because I don't see many paths to victory for him, but I would only take the +550 in this fight compared to the -800 on a guy who has been absolutely a money pit as a favorite, just not making money if you're betting on this guy as a UFC favorite. Maybe it all turns around here, but at -800, the ROI is very insignificant anyway. So for me, I think that when you look at, the African Savage, Kennedy Nzechukwu, he's got more upside long-term, right? He has a good win over Olbert, but he just starts very slow. He starts very reactive at times. He gets hit cleanly in the early going of his fights, and I don't think his chin is very good. So all things told, like I just don't trust Nzechukwu ever enough at these prices, but he's got long limbs and he's got an opponent that's very small, very undersized, and probably not in very good shape either. And I do think Kennedy can typically push a decent cardio pace rate. So for me, I lean towards Nzechukwu probably later on in the fight. And I also think that, the submission is live here. Okay, guys. We've got Farid, Basharat, and Victor Hugo we talked about. This is the only one that we haven't touched on yet. So I will go back and put timestamps, guys. If you are interested in going back and hearing some of our thoughts, I will try and do that as quickly as possible once I get off the air. But I have now talked about every fight. I was on Lambo Plays earlier as well. So if you, missed any of my thoughts and wanted clarity, that's another way to get it as well. So I appreciate the support. I appreciate everybody who's rocking with us. If I could ask you guys for one quick favor, just go ahead and drop a like on the video, get subscribed to the channel if you're not already. And if you want to make sure you're live with us each and every time when we go live here, just hit the bell for notifications. It's an easy way to get a notification on your phone, say, hey, we're about to go live. And then you get to make the choice if you want to come be a member of the sharpest chat in the game. But either way, I appreciate all you guys. Thank you all for the support. Right now, we have 108 people rocking with us live on YouTube. I appreciate you guys. And 374 people rocking with us live on X. If you don't mind, hit that follow button, hit that retweet button, and show a little love. I appreciate all the support wherever you're watching the show. Thank you guys. But here we go, guys. Last fight that we have to break down. And I think this is a really weird fight. Like, on the one hand, I'm starting to feel like Bruno Silva's washed. If you just look at his run out of results, like, he's definitely starting to show a lot of signs of wear. He's 35 years of age. He lost to Chris Weidman via technical decision. I cashed on that fight, guys. I had Weidman at plus 200. He closed plus 150, and I didn't feel great about it, right? I felt good that I had it. I felt good for the All-American that he got a win that he desperately needed. But frankly, it wasn't clean. It wasn't above board. Then you look at the Shara Magomedov, loss, and he showed a decent form in that fight. He competed, but ultimately he didn't do enough and he got outworked there. It was what it was. Then you look at the Brendan Allen fight. He had success early. He landed big shots. And then what happened? He got hurt by Brendan Allen and then finished. So I think there's definitely some room for concern. He knocked out Brad Tavares. That's a solid win. Brad Tavares, not an easy guy to put away, right? Duplessis went the full 15 with Brad Tavares, and this guy, Bruno Silva, put him away. So let's keep that in mind. Then you look at Gerald Meerschaert. Guys, that was a really bad looking fight, right? Like, that fight didn't look right. He looked like a different guy physically. He looked like a different guy in his facial structure. Like, it looked like they put a doppelganger in there for Bruno Silva. And man, he just did not have anything for GM3 that night. GM3 is also one of my personal GOATs. So I appreciate, what he brings to the table. And he claimed that one for jiu-jitsu, guys. Make no mistake. He absolutely knocked out Bruno Silva. And Bruno Silva shows no knockout losses on his record, but he has been hurt very badly in a couple of fights. That fight with GM3 is an example, but also the fight where he got submitted by Brendan Allen. He got hurt and then he got his guard passed in that occasion. He went to decision with Alex Poatan Ferreira, and I do think that is partially why his durability has been compromised ever since, right? He took so many huge shots from Ferreira, and Ferreira hits like a truck. This guy had never been knocked out. But I do think by the end of that fight, he didn't want any more damage from Ferreira. He was not feeling himself anymore. And I think that fight changed him. So could he win this fight? Absolutely. Because Nardiev, guys, is chinny. If you just look, like, I respect Nardiev. I think he's got skills, but he's 2-2 in the UFC. Both wins were by decision, both losses by decision. You look at the guy in his recent fights. It's very surprising to see a guy get signed to the UFC when he's 1-2 in his last 3 fights, and he was finished in the first round via KO and submission in that same run out. I'm not saying that Marcin Bandel or Vadim Kutsi is bad per se, but Vadim Kutsi lost on the Contender Series, right? He got finished, and we actually predicted it on the show as well. If you go back and look at the Contender Series breakdown, we were like, Kutsi is live to finish in round 1, but excuse me, he's not built to fight past the first round, in my humble opinion. Meanwhile, you look and, this guy was having a lot of success against Kutsi, tearing up his leg. Then he gets hit with one big shot and he fell apart. Against Marcin Bandel, he got dropped badly. Then he tried to get back up and then he got armbarred twice and finished on the second one. So I've seen, a lot of bad situations for this guy. And maybe it was just a couple tough fights in Brave. But Jara Hussein Al-Solawi, I hope I didn't butcher that. I'm sorry. The Jordanian Lion, I think his name is. But in any case, this guy went out there and leg kicked him very quickly and put him away right in the second round. So ultimately, I don't really love what I've seen from Nordiev in terms of his durability. I think this fight is more than likely going to be a Nordiev fight if it goes to the scorecards. I think he's probably the better wrestler. I think he's probably the better minute winner as well. But I just think Bruno Silva by KO at over 4-1 is probably off. Like, I think most of his money line equity here is the knockout. I don't think it's exclusively that, but I think most of it is that. And I do think that like skill for skill, I understand what you're saying, Aiden, that Bruno Silva is not good. And I agree with you, but Bruno Silva also has a lot of power. That is 100% accurate. 20-0 career to the knockout. He lost every minute of the fight against Andrew Sanchez. As soon as Sanchez got tired, he killed him. He was losing to Wellington Turman, gave up every bad position in the book. As soon as Wellington Turman fell off the top position, he killed him. So when you look back, he's got real wins as well. Knocked out, what's his name? Shlemenko, right? Very talented guy. I think that when you look at the UFC's standpoint on this fight, they don't really care who wins this one, right? Bruno Silva's been hard done. They're giving Nardiev a winnable fight against a washed guy, but also Nardiev is just not super reliable in my view. He's not a proven middleweight, right? He fought a lot of his career at 170 as well, 175. Bro, that Weidman fight let me know where he's at in his career. I feel you, but also like if you look back, Weidman went out there and fought Brad Tavares, right? And Brad Tavares looked pretty solid there. And Brad Tavares got killed by Bruno Silva. Styles make matchups. You know what I'm saying? So the one thing is, like, if you look at Chris Weidman, he may be washed, and he definitely is, but he eye pokes with the best of them. And if you look at his wrestling and grappling, it's still very good. You know, he was able to submit Kelvin Gastelum when he got him to the ground. So I think that this is the kind of fight where, you know, Bruno's training with a bunch of, what's it called? Guys that are on the card, right? If you look, Bruno Silva is putting in some work with, let's see, who else is Brazilian on this card? Bruno Silva was putting in some work maybe with Curseria or Ferreira. I can't remember, but a couple of the guys from Brazil definitely look to be working together for this one. But there you have it, guys. We're just about at the 2-hour mark. I want to say thank you so much for all the support. We have almost 500 people watching between X and YouTube. If you guys are not on YouTube already, following me, subscribing to the channel, I would appreciate if you do. What we don't do is what a lot of people do and promise you shit that we can't promise you. Like we win every week or we never get it wrong or a lot of these things that I just don't feel good, you know, being a bullshit artist, right? What we're going to do is we're going to come to you with the truth, which is I've been doing this for a long time. I've been tracking my results for many years and I am profitable long-term, third-party tracked, but I win and lose. You know, I don't win every week. So what I will try and do is come up with my best bets overnight. I am going to continue looking into the lines and the market. I have write-ups already for each and every fight that is on the card. And I want to just give you guys an example of what I'm talking about here, because I find that, you know, some people like, you know, long write-ups and some people don't, right? So if you don't like lengthy write-ups or detailed analysis, then I'll just level with you. Maybe my stuff is not for you because I am very detail heavy in terms of my approach. I do try and take a lot of notes. I believe in the phrase note takers are money makers. And if you look at this, this is a navigation document. I make this each and every week for the UFC. So this is UFC 308. Okay. And the social media A-side report. If we go share this tab, it's all the stuff that we talk about. Who's the A-side in each matchup? Who are the A-side underdogs? Those kind of considerations, right? If we go back to the navigation document, we have previous performance and odds range. What are the strong trends? Who have been winning in the past? Have they been doing a good job as favorites, as underdogs? And so I'll just share with you guys as a bonus for each and every one of you guys that stuck through to the end. God bless you and thank you. The undefeated favorite trends are now all listed on the screen. And again, are they going to stay undefeated after this? Lord only knows, right? But certainly it's worth knowing beforehand. These are guys that have had a pretty strong proof of concept in their odds range. So for whatever that's worth, right? I try and accumulate relevant information. And you may say to yourself, you know what? I don't care about the A-side report. I don't care about the previous performance and odds range. No skin off my nose. It doesn't hurt my feelings, right? But then you look, I got a main card breakdown, okay? Fight by fight, what I think is going to happen. Pretty long, lengthy breakdowns. And look at this one, guys. This is the main event. It's a long breakdown, right? It's a lot of detail. It's a lot of thoughts that I put into it. And what I can't say is that they're all going to be right. But what I can say is I put in a lot of time, effort, and energy. I try my very best, and I believe in my work. I stand by it. So when I look at the fights, I mean, Wick, it's a numbers game, you know? So I understand what you're saying about it's a fight. And it is a fight. Every fight is a matchup. You have to break it down as such, but it's also a market, right? And a lot of people in this game, in mixed martial arts, approach things based purely on the fight breakdown. And I just don't think that if you, you know, expand your horizons and look into any other sports betting content outside of the UFC, they have an understanding that numbers are paramount. And I do think that that is important. So for me, I appreciate each and every one of you guys who are rocking with us. If you're interested in my information, it's on the channel membership as well as on Patreon. But also, I share a ton of information for free on Twitter at LiamPicksFights, as well as on this platform. So if you're not subscribed, get subscribed. If you're not following on Twitter, get following on Twitter or X, whatever you call it these days. And my guy Trap Lord pointing out the first fight kicks off in 6 hours, homie. So what we need to do is get a little rest, come back fresh as a daisy, ready to break down some more fights. So I'll probably be live at some point tomorrow. But if not, guys, stay tuned because we'll be back next week. Come hell or high water. God bless, good luck, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you, guys.